Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater, and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch, and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance. But after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later, he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here. Japan 2023. People board a train and head to work. Everyone is busy with their own things, scrolling through Instagram feeds, making acquaintances on social networks, and discussing plans for the evening, unaware that in just a few minutes, their lives will change forever. Suddenly, the train's speed increases, and strange things start happening. A bottle cap rolling on the floor of the carriage suddenly disappears. Passengers begin receiving alerts about powerful earthquakes on their phones. Then the train enters a gloomy tunnel and comes to a sudden halt. People regain consciousness, bewildered by what has happened. One of the passengers opens the entrance doors, and people, screaming and pushing each other, rush to the exit, jumping from the high steps. But once outside, they can't believe their eyes. Traces of the civilized world are gone, and they are surrounded by the remnants of a destroyed city, overgrown with trees and grass. Moreover, all the carriages have disappeared without a trace, except for the 5th one they were in. As time passes, the passengers begin to get acquainted. One of the guys, Shirahama, a firefighter, examines the injured and suggests checking the tunnel behind the carriage. He is joined by a girl named Katana and a guy named Hayashima, who also wants to understand what happened. Meanwhile, the police in the city cannot figure out where the last 2 carriages have gone, while the rest of the train, along with the passengers, remains undamaged. The 3 volunteers enter the tunnel and walk through the dark underworld for a long time. Suddenly, they notice a light ahead and hurry towards it, but when they emerge outside, they are astonished. There is nothing around that would remind them of the year 2023 with skyscrapers and technology, just a vast, lifeless desert. Shocked, the trio returns to their fellow misfortune mates. Initially, people do not believe their report, but after Hayashima shows a video recording of the surroundings, they are forced to accept the new reality. After 7 hours, people languish in anticipation of rescuers, when one of the girls, Reni, secretly looks into Hayashima's bag and finds a letter marked with the criminal department's seals, leading her to suspect that the guy's a criminal. Then Reni snatches food from Katana's bag, but, thinking she was seen, discards the package. Hayashima picks it up and carries it to the train, just as Katana discovers the theft. Seeing it in the guy's hands, the passengers accuse him of theft. Moreover, Reni reports about the letter from the colony. Offended, Hayashima denies the accusations and announces his departure. At this time, Shirahama pulls out a box of fruits and offers to share them. While Katana is distributing the food, one of the guys reviews the video he made earlier, clearly showing Reni stealing the food. Realizing that Hayashima is innocent, Shirahama and Katana run after him, managing to save the guy who nearly falls into a deep ditch. In gratitude, he confesses that he works as a hairdresser and is already 30 years old. But he refuses to explain the origin of the letter from the colony. Night falls. Passengers somehow settle down to sleep, but many cannot sleep, worrying about their future. In the morning, people begin to realize that they may never return home. Shirahama tries to gather the scattering people, but a friend asks the guide not to take responsibility for others' lives. Then the firefighter confesses that because of him, his colleague was injured, losing the ability to walk. Now he believes he must help everyone he can. Together, they catch up with those who left and persuade them to return to the carriage to solve problems collectively. Seeing this, Hayashima remembers his brother who was in prison, and the letter in his bag was from him. Fate had it that he had to take on the upbringing of his younger brother, and he still feels guilty for his older brother becoming a criminal. Meanwhile, a couple of passengers explore the surrounding area and find the ruins of a high tower. This is particularly strange because the news reported its construction, which was supposed to be completed in 2026. And one of the passengers found a can in the forest dated that year. A biologist among them encountered a plant whose genetic modification takes 30 years. It turns out that they are in the distant future of Earth, and it's far from a joyful discovery. At the same time in 2023, all channels are broadcasting messages about the disappearance of two carriages, which had at least 100 passengers. Night approaches and many fall into despair, while Katana and Shirahama place plastic containers on the roof of the carriage, hoping for rain. In the morning, the biologist draws the others' attention to the dense greenery, which means there must be a body of water nearby. A group of youth sets out to explore the forest. Along the way, Hayashima confesses that his parents are criminals, and then the guy spots a frog. This means water is very close, but ahead are impassable cliffs, which can only be climbed with the help of ropes. The group returns to the train and cutting wires heads back to the cliffs. Shirahama climbs to the top and joyfully shouts upon seeing a waterfall, but looking around he is horrified. Instead of Mount Fuji, a sea stretches out before him. Returning, he tells the others about this, and people start to speculate what happened to their planet. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but the eldest passenger, Tanaka, goes outside and sees an unfamiliar person. But when he tells about it, no one believes him. Then it starts to rain, helping people to collect water and even bathe. Meanwhile, the biologist continues to study the surrounding fauna, finds several edible plants, and shows them to the others. And still, Katana manages to eat a poisonous berry, but fortunately, her poisoning is not fatal. The news that the girl has recovered has a sobering effect on the passengers. They finally realize that sitting still, they won't survive. People get to work and even make utensils from bamboo. Bank cards turn out to be decent knives. The group of youths brings water from the waterfall, and they prepare a soup from plants. But after dinner, some feel sick and the biologist discovers a couple of poisonous berries in the common pot. Someone remembers seeing Tanaka near the pot, who is not among them. Shirahama sets out to look for him, but stumbles, falls, and loses his torch. After a while, Shirahama returns without Tanaka, but with Hayashima's previously lost barber tools, which he had sorely missed. In the morning, the biologist announces to the people that he is going to look for a river, which should be nearby. His friends go with him. But in the forest, they encounter a stranger who injures the biologist and runs away. The guys carry him back to the train, where fortunately there is a medical student who provides the injured with first aid. The others help as much as they can and pray for the guy. Later, Tanaka unexpectedly returns from the forest. It turns out he worked for a security company and can show how to make traps around the camp. Reni asks Hayashima to fix her hair, and soon there's a queue for the guy. Meanwhile, Shirahama and Katana notice a teenager caught in one of the traps, but the youngster gets out on his own and runs away. The friends hurry after him and soon find themselves by the river, but the boy asks them to wait for him at the spot and disappears into the forest. Hayashima, noticing their disappearance, catches up with the pair. At this time, the teenager returns and leads the friends to carriage number 6, which mysteriously ended up several kilometers away from the 5th carriage. The passengers from the 5th carriage are welcomed by the leader of the group from the 6th carriage, Yumamoto. Their carriage was lucky to be near the river, where there was plenty of fresh water and fish. Moreover, among them was a builder who, under his guidance, they were able to quickly set up a camp and even build a kitchen and a toilet. The newcomers find the one who injured their biologist. He confesses that he did it out of fear, thinking they were going to attack him. He bows deeply, apologizing for his action. And Yumamoto admits that he believes a return to the past is possible. The man told them that in the early days, they found a small boat on the river, where he managed to fix the radio and catch a signal, apparently from Canada, where the year 2060 was mentioned. From what he heard, the man understood that in 2026 a disaster occurred. A huge asteroid fell to Earth, causing powerful earthquakes and tsunamis worldwide, instantly taking billions of lives. The dust thrown into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, leading to the extinction of the remaining species. But the main thing is that the asteroid didn't fall by chance. It was space debris, as besides state corporations, satellites began to be launched by anyone who fancied. One of the probes collided with a satellite, which in turn fell onto an asteroid, leading to a deviation of its orbit. So it was a man-made disaster. That's why it's so important to return to their year and change the future. Inspired by the example of the 6th carriage, the passengers decided to make a bath by the river. Meanwhile, Tanaka continues to deteriorate, making himself a doll from branches and talking to it. In the morning, the bath is ready. For the first time in many days, people bathe in hot water and wash their clothes. And the guys find a strange stone on the riverbank, which Yumamoto learns about. He sends his people to find it, but Reni notices strangers, and one of the guys lets slip that according to their leader, this stone might help them return home. The girls argue about the need to return, and Reni pushes Katana away. She falls and accidentally shifts a layer of soil, under which a dead body is discovered. Meanwhile, Tanaka reads in a newspaper an announcement about the search for a murderer in his description. At that time, Reni and Katana are attacked by guys from the 6th carriage, but Reni breaks free and runs to her own, where she tells about the found corpse, while Katana escapes from the guys through the forest. The 5th carriage decides to make weapons, while Shirahama and Hayashima run to the neighbors. But the girl is not there, and Katana meanwhile makes it to the boat. Yumamoto is forced to confess to the guys that he killed one of the passengers, who suddenly became aggressive and started attacking people with a knife. That's why he was recognized as a leader. The guys go home, hoping that Katana has returned, but she's not there, and the rest urge to go to the 6th carriage and punish the guilty. And the guys go again to look for the girl. Katana hides in the boat when Yumamoto comes in. He pretends to be calling an unknown station, but the girl sees that the wires are cut. The man discovers her and confesses that he doesn't want to return to the past because he intends to create a new society here. After that, he ties up Katana and locks her in the cabin, where her screams cannot be heard. In the morning, the passengers of the 5th carriage are just about to attack the neighbors when one of the women suggests backing up and looking for a building where they could hide. At this time, guys from the 6th carriage go to the neighbors to scavenge something, but they fall into traps. A fight starts when the rest of the 6th carriage's passengers arrive, and there are more men among them. The fight escalates into a real battle, which is stopped by the appearance of the escaped Katana, who accuses Yumamoto of lying. He is forced to admit to the deception, but he just wanted to keep people's spirits up. However, the passengers decide to exile the former leader. Before leaving, the man hands over a journal from the ship, which contains information about the tower that could help them return to the past. Meanwhile, those who went to search for the building reach the tower and find glowing asteroid fragments there. And in 2023, scientist Ray, after reviewing the video surveillance camera recordings, discovers that a wormhole appeared in the tunnel at the moment of the disappearance of 2 carriages, which apparently was the result of a distortion in the space-time continuum. The passengers study the journal found by Yumamoto and learn the exact date of the disaster. Moreover, they have an asteroid fragment that possesses a phenomenal magnetic charge. One of the passengers remembers how on the day of their departure, he saw something in the sky resembling a falling star. In the past, Ray, analyzing the same event, concludes that it was the flare from a supernova explosion. In the future, there's also an expert who explains that supernovas occur in space when a star reaches the end of its life cycle and explodes, releasing a massive amount of energy. Apparently, this created the temporal rift into which both carriages fell. It means they need to open this wormhole again. In the evening, a strong storm begins, forcing people to seek more reliable shelter than the carriage. Tanaka opens the rear doors leading into the tunnel. Unexpectedly, a strong gust snatches his doll and sucks it into the wormhole caused by the hurricane. But as soon as the storm subsides, the wormhole disappears. And in 2023, scientists find Tanaka's doll. Passengers in the future conclude that to summon the wormhole, they need a powerful energy source, for which they start looking for remnants of power lines. Digging up each post, the passengers find an electrical substation where somehow working equipment is preserved. They redirect enough electricity into the tunnel to stabilize the wormhole with the onset of the next storm, enough to return to the past. The storm starts at night, supported by the power of the substation. The wormhole opens, and everyone enters the carriage except Tanaka, who refused to return. The carriage is swallowed by the hole and races somewhere in space and time until its doors are opened by security service employees who say they have arrived on May 1, 2026, which means there are only a few months left before the asteroid falls. After going through quarantine procedures, the passengers tell the officials, presenting as evidence fragments of the meteorite and unusual plants from the future. Only the officials don't believe the stories about the upcoming apocalypse. Later, the internet buzzes about the incident. The time travelers find fans, which helps maintain interest in the traveler's story about the upcoming end of the world. Meanwhile, scientist Ray becomes convinced that the travelers are telling the truth, as he has also tracked the asteroid. One of the passengers posts an appeal on the internet telling ordinary people about the impending danger, and a passenger who held a high position in the government before the trip makes her way to the Minister of Defense. She listens to her former colleague and reports that the government believed them and is already preparing to launch a missile capable of altering the asteroid's trajectory to pass by Earth. Time passes, and the day of the catastrophe is about to dawn. The travelers decide to gather together on the platform to find out whether it was possible to avert the disaster, and if not, to perish together. But the military successfully completes their task and changes the meteorite's trajectory, saving humanity from total extinction. Quite an unusual series where various theories about the impending doom of humanity are mixed. And the finale of the story is very relevant, emphasizing that life on Earth is the result of the actions of each living being. And the future of the planet is a collective human responsibility. Evening supermarket. Near one of the shelves, a young man is talking on the phone with his wife. The woman is irritated, and the guy is trying to justify himself. He didn't intentionally almost buy the wrong product, and his purchase of a PlayStation has nothing to do with it, and they wouldn't have been able to relax in Alupka even with that money. He went there for work. At the checkout, there are 3 people in line. The first is a man who looks a bit homeless. The cashier announces the total, and the man is short of 10 rubles. He tries to persuade the cashier, but she remains firm. So the man turns to those waiting in line. If they care about the fate of a person, they should lend him the missing amount. He asks them to think that they are all preparing for a terrible judgment. And what will they be able to tell when facing the Almighty? While the man delivers this speech, people react differently. One person leaves the line altogether. The man turns to a young guy. It seems like he's not destitute. So, what are 10 rubles to him? A woman standing behind him takes out a coin. The man thanks her and says that angels won't forget her, and perhaps this act will outweigh all her sins. Then he takes out 50 rubles from his pocket and gives it to the cashier. He returns the coin to woman, places a 10-ruble coin on the counter, and tells the young guy that he will need it. The man adds that he will have something to remember. In hell. The homeless man leaves, and the young guy makes the payment. The cashier asks for change, 10 rubles, and he hands her the homeless man's coin. The young guy exits to an empty parking lot. He continues his phone conversation, again justifying himself for some business trip and a woman whom his wife is jealous of. He sees the man who was sitting on the curb earlier. He approaches and gives him the coin because he doesn't need someone else's. The homeless man asks, is he afraid of burning in the fiery Gehenna? Perhaps he believes in the Lord? The guy confesses that he's not very religious, to which the homeless man inquires, so, after death he plans to become worm food? Is that the pinnacle of his life? The guy says he's a mathematician and believes in the exact sciences. He asks if there's any evidence of God's existence. The homeless man claims there is an undeniable fact. The guy starts making fun of him and suggests taking a break from doing nothing on the way back. The homeless man starts crying. The guy is confused about what upset him so much. He reassures the homeless man, telling him he's young and he has everything ahead of him. It's the right time to think about the future because it all depends on him. By the way, he mentioned earlier that he can provide evidence of God's existence. And the homeless man calmly says that he saw Jesus himself because he is the eternal Jew, the one who didn't let the Lord rest at his house when he was carrying his cross. He told Jesus that he would rest on the way back. Jesus agreed, but he would have to wait for him. The guy asks again, and this happened 2,000 years ago. The homeless man understands that it does indeed sound strange. He was amazed at first too, but then he got used to it. So, for him, the existence of Jesus Christ is a fact. However, he can't prove it in any way. He didn't keep a piece of clothing that Jesus wore, and how could he prove that it wasn't a piece of his own underwear? He doesn't have the cup from which Christ drank or the stone from under his cross. The guy concedes that the Jew saw Jesus. What was he like? The homeless man says he was just like everyone else, only tormented. He also doesn't remember his face. The guy remembers all the faces he's seen in his life. The guy is puzzled and asks again to tell him what happened. The Jew says that Jesus was being led past his house under guard. He stopped to rest, and the Jew forbade him to lean on his house. After all, he called himself the Son of God. It was outrageous, so he told him that he would rest on the way back, and God ordered him to wait for him. He couldn't know who he really was, and no one could. The guy asks if the Jew is ashamed that he didn't let Jesus rest. The homeless man asks, maybe that was God's plan? The guy asks if he tried to make amends for it. Maybe become a clergyman, for example. The conversation partner admits that he tried that many times, but no one descended from the heavens, and no indulgence was granted. The guy asks, what else has he been throughout all these years? Maybe an immortal killer. An immortal killer, that would be cool. The Jew objects. Being immortal is cool in movies, but in real life, you need to find food, seek warmth, and wait, like waiting in line. He has already studied all the ads on the walls, all the holes in the couch, but people keep coming and going. It's no longer interesting to him who stood where in the hierarchy, whose place was more comfortable, who jumped the queue. The guy inquires, what is he waiting for? The second coming, or the end of the world? The homeless man nods, maybe both. No one knows when the end will come. The guy is puzzled again, but an ordinary person is afraid of death. So is the homeless man. He's eternal, but if you cut off one of his fingers, he won't keep living with 4 fingers. He's broken his bones many times. But what if a tank shoots him in the head? Will he be an undying headless man? The homeless man confidently says that won't happen. Hasn't he tried to end his life himself? The Jew nods. Of course, he even tried to hang himself in the very beginning. He hung from a tree for 2 weeks with excruciating pain in his throat until the branch broke. Later, in 1945, he was captured by the fascists and got scared. He tried to shoot himself. The gun jammed. It was exploded, shredding his whole arm with shrapnel. But everything healed. He came to Russia from Poland 40 years ago. The guy is curious again. Maybe he's just schizophrenic, and doesn't it bother him at all? How did he decide that all these events were real? The homeless man shows his arm. He made notches. 920, 1464, 1812. Decades pass. And he sits and thinks, maybe he scratched them yesterday, put the dates, as if 200 years had passed. And he asks for help to figure it out, like stabbing him with a knife, for example. But the guy refuses. He doesn't want to explain to the police that he saw Jesus and shouldn't have died. The homeless man shrugs, saying, that's how it works. They walk across the parking lot. The guy asks him to tell something from history. For instance, what was happening in the 1st century? The homeless man responds, well, in general, it was the same. Shepherds herded sheep and fishermen fished. The guy insists, but in the world? The significant appearance of Jesus, church reforms, any mysteries and intrigues. The homeless man, in puzzlement, asks, where does he know all this from? He also learned it from books. Now, the guy remembers where he was in August 2000. Throughout the ages, he just lived. He was in different countries. It's just that the body requires a warm place and a piece of bread. As for how neighbors reacted to him being eternally alive and forever young, they didn't pay much attention to him, and he didn't stay in one place for long. Does he know ancient languages? He does, but now they are considered dead, and who can verify them? The men touch upon the topic of space. The homeless man has seen many strange things, but he hasn't encountered extraterrestrials. The most pressing question, can it really be that in all this diversity of worlds, there are no other forms of life? The guy comments that it's all too profound for a homeless, possibly heavy-drinking man. The homeless man leaves, and the guy locks his car and follows him. He asks, why did Jesus punish him? Shouldn't he be all-forgiving? The Jew says that it wasn't Jesus who punished him at all. He cursed himself with his own words, and the Lord simply fulfilled his own wish. The biggest curse is not that he's been waiting for 1,000 years, but that he, like a dull shepherd, remained the same. A person who creates, lives a spiritually enriched life. The guy doesn't believe it. It just can't be. After all, he's been living for so long. He knows much more than others. Surely he met great people like Michelangelo or Nietzsche. To this, the homeless man retorts, how can you understand what they'll say about this specific person after death, that he was a genius? The guy asks how people lived, what they thought and what they believed in 1,000 years ago. The homeless man responds, they believed the earth was flat, that God sat in the sky above the clouds and watched every step. But if he is simply looking through our own eyes, then he is just an observer, and he can't judge us for our actions, right? It means he is concerned about our actions only as much as they concern us. And if God is in everyone, then so is the devil. The guy teases him. Those are some profound words for a weird man. The homeless man smiles. In a certain sense, a person always has a choice. And fate exists. The fate of a person is determined by their choice. But at any moment they can stop choosing that fate and start choosing another. So why, even in the modern world, are people willing to kill those who don't share their faith? You just need to make an effort to keep your opinion about someone else's religion to yourself. A person finds something sacred for themselves, and it gives their life meaning, but then they start comparing their primary gender characteristics. They try to prove that their meaning is more significant and more important than another person's. Of course, it leads to conflict. His wife calls again. The guy apologizes and says he hasn't finished yet. He met an interesting person and got engrossed in conversation. She says she'll come over now. He goes back to the homeless man and sits down next to him. The guy asks, why is he homeless if he's so intelligent? And why doesn't he want to change anything? The homeless man says he's living like he's preparing for a big exam, postponing the transformation of his life for later. The conversation partner says he's living somewhat similarly, but he doesn't want to think about death. He's still very young after all. The Jew reassures him, you won't even notice how it passes. No matter what a person does, middle age arrives, and then old age. And deep down, every old man feels like a little boy. The guy says he doesn't want to think about old age and death. Probably that's why people invented religion, to make it seem like there's something after death. Then he smiles and says that he's been clearly fooled. His conversation partner hasn't lived for 2,000 years. He doesn't seem crazy, but maybe he has a special organism. Cells divide more frequently, the body constantly regenerates, unique genetics perhaps. Probably they can make medicine from his blood. It can't be that he hasn't done anything remarkable throughout his life. He was in Poland during World War II. Did he hide Jews? The Jew laughs. He is a Jew himself. It was a Polish family that hid him, and then they were discovered and taken as prisoners. That's when he tried to shoot himself. The guy laments, well, yes, times were tough. The homeless man disagrees. Times are always the same. The conversation partner is astonished, but how can that be? Everything has changed in the world. If you trace history from the Middle Ages to the present day, a lot has changed. The Jew says that everything changes if you pay attention to those changes every day, just like a river flows, rages, and is never the same. However, the way that river flowed 100 years ago is the same way it flows today, in the same channel. The guy becomes more animated and asks the homeless man what he thinks about the paradox of faith. Can God create a stone that he can't lift? The homeless man explains, it's a paradox of the mind. If he's a scientific atheist, he'd agree that all information about the surrounding world enters the mind through the senses. The idea of God is in his mind, so the problem is in his mind. God in your mind can't create a stone in your mind that he's about to lift in your own mind. The guy is puzzled, but if he can't lift it, then he's not all-powerful. The homeless man advises him not to overcomplicate things in his mind. The conversation partner sighs. He would like to get some answers. The homeless man says he would like to get some answers too. For example, he wants to know what our purpose is, or what happens after death, or what one needs to accomplish in life. Then he asks the guy what he personally would do if he lived for 1,000 years. Seeing the guy pondering, he concludes, he would simply live and nothing else. On the first day, he'd jump for joy. And then? The guy is puzzled. How can one realize oneself as an immortal person then? After all, if humans are God's creations, why did he create them? There must be some meaning to it, right? The homeless man agrees. There must be, but he doesn't know it. And he doesn't know a single person who has realized themselves. Even those who entered history feel like something is missing. Take Hitler, for example. Even if one imagines that he genuinely believed in the ideas he propagated and wanted to change the course of history, did he realize himself? No. He spent his entire life becoming and embodying the caricature of a villain with a mustache. Did he realize the spark inside him, the one that made people stand up and follow him? He doesn't know if one can realize themselves within the framework of our world. So how can a person get to heaven if there's a devil inside them? The homeless man says that all human emotions are manifestations of fear. The part of a person that lives in that fear experiences eternal torment in hell, but the other part of them is love. Even in the Bible, it's written that God is love. To get to heaven, one must choose God within themselves. The guy asks, "Are you God?" The homeless man laughs. He's unpredictable. Sometimes he calls him a homeless man, and sometimes God. He's a human being, but in him, just like in everyone else, there's a bit of God, a bit of love. But surely God must have had a purpose for him. He can't just have left him to live forever and await the end of the world for no reason. There must be meaning in all of this. And the Jew retells Plato's words. Horses are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a horse, which lives forever. Likewise, people are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a human, which lives forever. It will live until the end of humanity. Their meeting has no symbolism. He can consider that he just met the idea of a human, which he's always met, even in the mirror. All of them are embodiments of the idea of a human. Tall, short, sad, happy, lazy, successful, full, gloomy, and open. They all think they are unique, but new ones come to replace them. Year after year, century after century, they were children yesterday, and today they are already old. But even so, new ones come to take their place, running, jumping, munching, and leaving in just the same way. A phone notification rings. A woman walks around his car in the parking lot. The guy introduces the homeless man, saying he's the one who has seen Jesus himself. The woman thinks he's mocking her. She drove across the entire city, and he's here with a vagabond. The guy tries to explain. Then a man with the same face as the homeless man approaches and yells at him. He's been looking for him for over an hour. Bags won't carry themselves. The homeless man leaves with him. The guy is bewildered. They are identical. The woman says he's gone mad and gets into her car, driving away. The guy gets into his car and looks in the mirror. The eyes of Ahasuerus are looking at him. At the beginning of the movie, we see an experienced fisherman heading out to sea. Like thousands of times before, he casts his net from the boat, but something goes wrong and the net gets caught on something on the ocean floor. The fisherman dives down, but he can't make it back to the surface as a huge school of fish surrounds him. Charlie, a lighthouse keeper, calls her colleagues in Germany to discuss current affairs. She's interrupted by a signal on her monitor and rushes off to investigate. Charlie has to swim to the duty boy to dive into the water and retrieve a sensor that somehow got tangled up in fishing nets. Strange things are also happening in Canada. Leon, a young whale researcher, is called to Vancouver's City Beach, where a giant killer whale washed up a couple of hours ago. After examining the animal, he heads to the fishing dock to find out who among the poachers caused serious cuts to the killer whale. An old fisherman takes Leon to his boat and shows him the bitten side of the vessel which was used to try and overturn the killer whale. Leon doesn't believe this story, but the man is sure that the fisherman wouldn't lie to him and that they had to destroy the whale to save themselves. Charlie and her new friend launch a repaired sensor into the ocean, tasked with tracking marine animal population. They notice methane ice fragments around the boat, which often rise to the surface, but today there are too many of them. Leon finally hears the whales and learns that they have been seen in various locations along the coast. Before heading out to sea, he calls his girlfriend Lizzie, who has already taken tourists on her boat to see killer whales in the wild. A giant whale appears next to Leon's boat. After freezing for a couple of minutes, the giant disappears underwater, but a whole pod of orcas takes its place. Lizzie takes the tourists onto the deck and everyone watches in awe as the whales appear. The humpback giant also appears next to the ship and the tourists are able to see it up close. The strange behavior of the whale pleases everyone except Leon, who tries to warn his friend but is too late. The next trick of the whale hits the metal of the boat. Leon arrives at the scene of the accident and tries to save those who survived the hit, but now a pod of orcas is hunting for the tourists. Leon is unable to save Lizzie. The action shifts to a French restaurant. After gathering fresh seafood at the market, the chef plans to prepare lobsters, but one of them shoots an unknown liquid into the man's face. After wiping his face, the chef continues working, but by evening he and two other cooks begin to feel ill. The chef passes away that same evening and the two young cooks are taken to the ICU, waiting for the test results to determine what happened. At the same time, a Norwegian ship in the sea lowers a camera to study an unusual phenomenon, an invasion of ice worms. A few specimens are brought to the surface for study, and the scientist finds a new peculiarity. These creatures have jaws and reproduce several times faster. A commission is formed and everyone agrees that they have discovered a new species of worms and bacteria. Leon talks to the owner of a fishing boat who is also a witness to the humpback whales attacking other boats the day before. In addition, Leon is shown another anomaly. The bottom of the ship that returned from the sea is covered with a thick layer of mollusks which has never been seen before. A group of scientists launches a sampler onto the seafloor to check the soil where worms were found, but due to a methane leak, an explosion occurs. The ship manages to survive, but the team is greatly frightened. The scientists are not only scared of the mistake during the operation, but also the results of the test. In addition to the worms on the seafloor, there are bacteria that eat ice and can reach the very bottom. Jess records a video message to Charlie when something strange suddenly happens and alarming readings appear on the monitors. The water under the ship starts boiling and something pulls it down into the depths. The action shifts to Venice. A young man in love reads poetry on a bridge when suddenly the book falls from his hands and ends up in the canal. The couple immediately forgets about the poetry book because before their eyes is an even stranger sight. Thousands of giant jellyfish rise to the surface. Analysis of the bacteria from the infected chef reveals a new strain that feeds on blood cells. It turns out that several more people have died after visiting the restaurant on the coast. Leon requests permission to perform an autopsy on the killer whale to find out how pollution affects whales and whether this could be related to changes in the behavior of these giants. There is nothing inside the whale that could scare the experts, but Leon finds an unknown substance in its brain, which is sent for analysis. Another victim of infection appears, a young man from a car wash. By putting together all the events, the scientists understand that the bacteria spread from the restaurant through the water supply system. Leon is informed of new cases of whale attacks. Looking at the map, the guy finds a pattern. All the changes occur with the whales during migration. To verify his suspicions, the guy sails to the place where the whales are resting during their sleep. The dive almost ends in tragedy, but Leon manages to install a camera on one of the whales and get out. Sigurd finds out that the Japanese have also found the worms, but they are not in a hurry to report it to the world. Recordings from the cameras are checked in 2 laboratories at once. Leon's footage shows that the whale pod descended to the very bottom, where they were met with strange glowing. Far from the events, a new incident occurs on the coast. Hordes of crabs crawl out onto the streets of a small village. Another shot of the seabed finally lifts the veil of mystery. It turns out that one of the oil and gas companies was drilling ice in a forbidden place and damaged the seabed for several kilometers. Leon has to sneak through a fence to get to the guarded port area to collect a few more mussels for analysis from the ship, but he's caught by security and arrested. In the morning, Mr. Sato, the Japanese owner of the ship, contacts Leon. He asks the guy not to trespass on his territory in this way again, but promises to provide access to all materials for study. Charlie only now receives the message recorded by Jess a few minutes before the tragedy. When the emotions subside, the girl manages to notice some peculiarities on the recording. For example, a glow behind a porthole. Crabs are being delivered to the laboratory, which have started to emerge on the surface in different parts of the world. As expected, they too are filled with a strange substance that absorbs blood cells at an incredible speed. Charlie is reviewing the video repeatedly, not understanding what else is wrong with it. Finally, the girl's hearing catches a sound that is very similar to the sound from the deep-sea recording. The girl contacts the laboratory and shows them a part of the recording that caught her attention, but her stern boss, Katerina, rejects all the scientists' ideas, considering the sound on different recordings to be just random noise. She orders Charlie to finish up the work and shut down the station for the winter without coming up with incredible theories. But after cooling down and carefully considering Charlie's words, Katerina still decides to test this hypothesis, and a helicopter with a group of scientists and a deep water device arrives on the island. The device is delivered to the island by Sigor, and after handing it over to Charlie, he's about to leave. But at the same time, emergency messages come to the scientists on the mainland. They are only able to reach Sigor and inform him that a terrifying tsunami is approaching the coast. Those who see it with their own eyes realize that there is no chance of survival. Sigor manages to warn Charlie and they leave. At the conference, scientists give a report that the discovered bacteria intentionally infect humans, and soon everyone will have to flee far away from water sources. Leon tries to warn his fishermen friends about this, but none of them are ready to live on land, choosing to die in their familiar environment. Rahim meets Leon at the institute to participate in a scientific conference. The best minds gather to discuss what is happening, and most agree that there is some force at work that wants to drive people out of the ocean. Only Katerina is against everyone else. She refuses to abandon the knowledge and convictions gained through years of experience, so she orders the group to seek a logical explanation based on science. Despite objections from their mentor, the group of scientists presents their theory to the public, convincing the government that marine inhabitants infected with bacteria are intentionally attacking humans. They even give the new intelligence a name, the However, such a version only elicits irony from top officials, who also suggest finding more scientific solutions to a problem than negotiating with an unknown intelligence. Astrophysicist Samantha Grove comes to the scientists' aid. Unlike politicians, she carefully studied the report and agrees that the strange sound on different recordings has all the characteristics of an unfamiliar world language. In addition, her team managed to capture the exact same signal from Antarctica. Another influential person, Japanese Mifuno, also believes in Sigor's theory and agrees to finance his venture, hoping it will help to save the world. Sigor assembles the team and informs them of the start of the mission. He suggests everyone think carefully and assess the risks, and those willing to go all the way will be waiting for an expedition to the Arctic in 48 hours. The scientists go home to say goodbye to their loved ones and warn them of their departure. The relatives of many try to persuade them to stay, but everyone understands that this is their last chance to fix something. According to scientists' calculations, the largest accumulation of intelligent bacteria is located in one of the valleys in Antarctica, where they could have lived for millions of years prior. The company is preparing to establish contact, and everyone is playing their role while giving interviews to a young journalist. Finally, the equipment on the ship starts buzzing with interference, and the scientists prepare to capture a signal from the mysterious organism. Sarah, Mifuno's assistant, sits down next to Leon at the table and confesses to him that she would have never believed in their theory if it weren't for her boss, who has proven over many years that his intuition never fails. Samantha is devising a plan. She intends to add a sound of a human child scream to the organism's audio signal and return the recording to the intelligence to show that they are ready to communicate. Charlie asks her colleague to take her with him in the diving apparatus to the bottom. The ship drops anchor and the scientists begin transmitting the sound message. Meanwhile, the daring couple gets into the capsule and prepares to dive to the depths. The whole team is eagerly awaiting any reaction, and finally movement appears on the radar and the sensors pick up a sound signal. The team from the capsule tries to contact the captain's bridge to report that their fans are malfunctioning and they are running out of oxygen, but communication is not working. The chief pilot Luther is ready to return, but Charlie notices some movement and turns off the lights, waiting to see what happens next. On the ship, they also notice something approaching. Sigor insists that the captain recall the submarine, but they can't reach the group. Luther doesn't want to risk anymore and he lifts the boat. On the ship, a hatch opens to receive the capsule into a special compartment. Charlie notices a strange glow appearing around them at that moment, but she doesn't tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Samantha reports that they have managed to establish contact. The sound signal has returned and the child's cry has been altered as a sign that the bacteria understood the message from humans. Dr. Chase is looking for a way to cure those who have already been infected by the bacteria. Luther tells the journalist that he saw nothing at the depth, and everything Charlie saw was probably a figment of her imagination, just like the whole idea of intelligence. Nevertheless, Samantha tries to decipher the messages to assemble them into a response signal that the intelligence will understand. While staying in the compartment with the capsule, the journalist notices a glow in the pool. The lights on the ship go out and interference begins. When everything is restored, the captain sees the journalist's body fallen on the monitor. Chase tries to save the girl, and on her lips she notices a liquid resembling cerebrospinal fluid. Samantha tells the team and the captain that during the voltage surge there was a signal surge and it was so low that no one heard it. But most importantly, in the opinion of the astrophysicist, it originated from inside the ship. Charlie listens to what her colleagues are saying, but she never musters the courage to tell them that they brought the bacteria into the pool. Leon visits the girl, whose body has become covered in strange spots. The doctor asks the guy and Sarah for help. They must hold the girl while she takes a sample of the spinal fluid for analysis. The doctor tells the team about the results of the analysis. The substance previously found in marine creatures was discovered in Alicia's spinal cord. Chase believes that bacteria were attempting to merge with the girl's cells, and Charlie admits to seeing the glowing enter the ship with them. Samantha records a new message for the this time including an audio image from the astrophysicist. Charlie goes down to the sealed compartment without permission, and the pool starts glowing again, creating unusual shapes with the light. At that moment, Samantha receives a response message from the entity, which also contains an image. Mr. Mifuno's helicopter lands on the ship as he wants to be present for the opening. Sigor shows him the recording from the pool cameras and the image sent in response to Samantha's message. According to the astrophysicist, they have an image of the super ocean that surrounded a supercontinent millions of years ago. According to the scientists, the reminded them that they were, are, and will be on Earth much longer than humans, and all they want is for the oceans to be left alone and not destroyed. But there is good news. Since the entity is responding to messages, the team has a chance to negotiate and reach a ceasefire. In the meantime, Chase devises a drug that can destroy bacteria that consume blood cells. This news creates disagreement within the team. Mifuno plans to test the substance in the pool and if it works, completely destroy the Sigor disagrees with this, at least until they confirm that they cannot negotiate with the Chase tries to take the middle ground and suggests trying the drug in the pool but not rushing to launch it into the open ocean. Everyone gathers to watch the experiment. Chase launches the drug into the water, which immediately begins to rise, emitting a terrible scream that shatters the glass. The captain is informed that nothing is working on the ship and they are simply drifting in the waters of Antarctica. But worse, the ship is surrounded by icebergs. The vessel collides with an iceberg, but unexpectedly a blue glow takes it somewhere else. The captain orders the engines to be started to break free from the control of the He also doesn't understand why they don't pour all the drug they have on board into the water. But Sigurd tries to explain to the captain that everything that happened now is the price for his thoughtless experiment in the pool, and no one in the world will manufacture enough of the substance to destroy worldwide. The only way out is to make a truce. While the team is deciding how to negotiate with the entity traps the ship between the icebergs. Charlie hurries to the capsule to descend and deliver Luther's body to as a sign of complete obedience. Once at depth, Charlie changes her plan. She injects leukocytes into her heart that can merge with and opens the capsule door. The body falls under the control of and the icebergs release the ship, while billions of lights envelop the girl underwater. Later, Charlie brings the ship to a deserted island. It opens its eyes and looks at the sky with glowing blue eyes. The series ends here. Please write in the comments what you think about this series. The movie begins in Leningrad in 1940. A young woman named Anya works as a seamstress in a factory where a young machinist, Vasily, who is very serious, notices her and even asks her to introduce him to her only relative, her brother Peter. However, Anya asks for a little more time, and the young man agrees to wait until the next day. But as the girl leaves for her lunch break, he quietly follows her, admiring her. Anya walks down the street, looking at a dirigible hovering above, from which German journalists are filming the city below. At this moment, a tram driven by Peter pulls up to an intersection. Suddenly, Anya realizes that a fast-moving truck is about to crash into the tram, and her brother will likely perish. Frozen in fear, she suddenly emits light waves that lift the truck into the air and throw it away from the intersection. The tram's windows shatter, injuring people, but a major accident is averted. This entire incident is captured on film by the journalists in the dirigible. As the shocked people try to recover, Peter jumps out of the tram, grabs Anya, and quickly takes her away. The girl regains consciousness in their shared room. Peter packs their belongings, urging his sister to flee Leningrad, although she is reluctant since they have already had to move several times due to her supernatural abilities manifesting at the most inappropriate times and attracting the attention of the authorities. Peter asks her to control her powers, but Anya is unable to master them as they are beyond her control. At that moment, representatives of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs burst into the room and arrest the siblings. An investigator named Ivan arrives at the scene. He interviews the victims, and one of the women recalls the strange girl standing at the crossroad. Back at the office, Ivan begins interrogating Anya, but she cannot provide any concrete information. She insists it was just an unfortunate accident, and then Ivan shows her photos from their previous residences where strange incidents and destruction occurred, prompting the siblings to move hastily. The investigator is willing to believe she is not a criminal, especially since he has also witnessed something very strange in his life. However, Ivan is unable to elaborate as his superior, Petrov, who turns out to be his father-in-law, takes Anya and leads her to the secret facilities managed by Professor Ilinsky. The scientist welcomes the girl, explaining that she is special and now they will study her abilities. However, Anya refuses to cooperate until she sees her brother, and Ilinsky promises to arrange a meeting for them. Meanwhile, Ivan cannot calm down, although Petrov, who is also his father-in-law, demands he forget the incident and focus on other matters. He had already barely managed to suppress his absurd report about an incident in Madrid. Returning home, Ivan tries to tell everything to his wife Vera, but she asks him to take a vacation and forget everything that happened. The action shifts to 1936. A group of Soviet soldiers, including Ivan, engages in battle with Spanish fascists in Madrid. Suddenly, a man in a strict coat and hat, wearing a strange mask, appears before them. Looking at the soldiers, he utters something incomprehensible, after which Ivan's comrades start shooting themselves one by one. Only Ivan finds the strength to shoot at the man in the mask. The man quickly disappears, leaving Ivan amidst his fallen comrades. The year is 1940. A man in a mask named Neumann and his assistant Katerina arrive in Munich, where the woman meets a Jewish boy named Baruch on the street, who plays chess brilliantly. She offers him a ride with them, noting he can always leave if he does not like their school. An orphan agrees and gets into the car, where Neumann utters several hissing words, causing Baruch to fall asleep instantly. Neumann agrees that the boy is brilliant, but by no means possesses superpowers. However, Katerina is determined to help the boy. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Professor Ilinsky leads Anya to the laboratory where she will be studied, and fulfilling his promise, brings her to a cell to see her brother. Peter again asks her not to show her abilities, and she promises to write to him. Baruch is brought to an ancient castle owned by Neumann. The boy is laid in a hammock in a hall inhabited by many other teenagers, but when the adults leave, he wakes up and is frightened by the dark silhouettes surrounding him. Back in Moscow, Professor Ilinsky leads Anya to a separate room, more like a cell, and locks her in there. He then reports to Petrov that he has never seen anything like it. The girl is a scientific discovery, a unique case, to which the chief objects. She is a new weapon. Later, Anya is subjected to various tests, but she shows nothing special. Ivan cannot forget the incident, studying everything related to the strange explosion. The video footage of the accident also reaches Neumann, and he decides to fly to the USSR. There, the man is taken to meet with Professor Ilinsky. Neumann introduces himself as a worker from the Ahnenerbe organization and immediately determines that the professor is terminally ill. He offers to ease his pain if the professor allows him to speak with Anya. Ilyinsky does not believe in his abilities, but Neumann utters something, and glowing waves emanate from him, enveloping the professor, causing him to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of this, Neumann searches his desk and takes some papers. Soon, Ilyinsky regains consciousness, but strangely feels no pain. He agrees to arrange a meeting with Anya and leads the German to the laboratory. Neumann approaches the girl and secretly shows her an execution order for her brother. Then waves of unprecedented force begin to emanate from the girl, literally blowing up the entire laboratory. Neumann grabs her and escapes. Ivan sees from the window a man in a hat whom he immediately recognizes and runs to the laboratory where explosions are heard. But Neumann and the girl are nowhere to be found. The narrative shifts to 1924. In a remote Karelian village, a woman lives with two children, Peter and Anya. One day they go with the village boys into the forest. Suddenly a pack of wolves leaps out at the children. The children freeze in fear, but waves emanate from Anya, scattering the beasts. When the men arrive at the clearing, they find the girl dead. 1940. Petrov enters the devastated laboratory, where people connected by tubes into a single organism and marked with the letter M lie in chairs. At first glance, this structure was not damaged by the explosion, as the injured Ilyinsky lying nearby confirms. The professor reports that Anya caused all this and refuses to continue the experiments. Then, Petrov shoots him. Afterward, he goes to Ilyinsky's colleague, who everyone simply calls Professor Lyubov. Petrov asks her to activate the M squad. Learning about the professor's death, the woman refuses to help Petrov, but he reminds her of her family, and Lyubov reluctantly agrees. On the train, a customs officer searches Neumann's compartment and finds an iron sarcophagus with Anya inside. Unsure of what to do, he goes for help. Meanwhile, Anya envisions her own funeral following the incident with the wolves. Frightened, she comes to, and Neumann informs her that he is saving her. Anya tries to run, but the customs officers, who decided to detain the strange German, stop her. However, he utters something, and the military personnel bring their pistols to their own heads. Neumann and Anya leave. At the same time in Moscow, Petrov reports to his colleagues that a member of the Ahnenerbe, which translates to ancestral heritage, Neumann has stolen a valuable exhibit from the USSR, the girl Anya. A squad has already been formed to pursue the German and will depart in a matter of days. Learning of this, Ivan requests to be included, but Petrov, feeling sorry for his daughter, refuses to do so. Neumann leads Anya to a spot where Katerina's car is waiting, and she drives the pair to the castle. It is apparent that the woman does not like Neumann's new toy, but he immediately says that Anya is just like him. At the castle, they are greeted by children whom Neumann calls his army. Anya is escorted to her room, and Neumann finds a guest in his office, Admiral Canaris, who is very interested in the scientist's research. But today he has come to express his displeasure with Neumann's sabotage in the USSR, as it could start a war. Neumann reassures him and invites him to a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Anya is startled by a sound and sees Baruch in her room, trying to open her window to escape the castle. But Katerina and Neumann appear and stop him. While Katerina takes the boy away, Neumann tries to convince Anya that the castle is a paradise, and no one wants to leave of their own volition. Katerina brings Baruch to a bedroom, reminding him that he must speak only German and not tell anyone his real name if he wants to live. But when she leaves, the other teenagers attack him. In Moscow, Ivan asks his wife to help him get enrolled in the squad, after which he goes to Professor Lyubov. He is interested in whether hypnosis can make a person do what another wants. The professor asks him not to travel to Germany, but he is determined to find the man in the mask. In the castle, Anya finds Baruch hanging. The boy tries to explain that the others hate him and beat him, therefore he wants to run away. But Anya admits that it was the same for her until she became strong, and he can too. Later they find Neumann in the park, who promises Anya he will teach her to control her power. He explains that he inherited the castle from the person who adopted him, and now it serves as a refuge. He has set up Anya's room according to her taste and hopes she will like it here. Grateful, Anya sits down at the sewing machine, unexpectedly remembering how the villagers burned their house, calling her a witch. Then her brother saved her, though their mother died in the fire. Back in Moscow, Petrov enrolls Ivan in the squad and asks the commander to ensure that he does not return. Leningrad, 1937. Returning from Madrid, Ivan writes in his report everything he witnessed, but Petrov does not believe him, noting that if the soldiers shot themselves, they could be declared deserters. Tired of trying to convince the young man, Petrov takes him to Professor Lyubov. 1940. A special forces unit travels to Germany in a grain car. Ivan warns his comrades about Neumann's peculiarities, but it seems they don't quite believe him. At the castle, the children undergo daily training, while Anya enjoys the long-forgotten peace. In the morning, Katerina brings her a box with a new dress sent by Neumann for her to wear at his birthday party. The girl goes out to the hall where the children are preparing decorations for the evening, and then they head to training. Baruch is afraid of heights and falls from a rope ladder, but no one pities him. After that, it's time for shooting practice, but the boy throws his pistol down and runs to the local cemetery where Neumann finds him. Baruch asks to be let go, but the scientist promises to teach him not to be afraid. Meanwhile, Squad M climbs out of the wagon, and Ivan remembers his training in 1936 before being sent to Madrid. Then his comrades met him coldly because he was the boss's son-in-law, but Ivan earned respect through hard work and cleverness. And now he is on a special mission. Suddenly, they are hailed by an old man who turns out to be their liaison and must take them to the castle. At the same time, Petrov is informed that the squad has successfully crossed the border. Guests start arriving at the castle. Neumann welcomes Canaris and escorts him to the hall where music plays, and ladies and gentlemen drink and talk about the beautiful evening. Neumann himself is enchanted by Anya's beauty, and she gives him a hand-embroidered handkerchief she made for him. Later, guests deliver laudatory speeches in honor of the birthday boy, and he invites Anya to dance to the envy of the present ladies. Canaris notices Katerina's displeasure, but the woman remains cold, rejecting his advances. She dislikes Canaris's interest in their wards, and he tells her that people are already coming for Anya from the USSR. Squad M reaches the forest house of their liaison, who supplies them with weapons and draws a path on a map, but then shots ring out. German soldiers have caught up with the saboteurs. A battle ensues and the Russians win. Later, the commander finishes off the wounded enemies and, unexpectedly for Ivan, shoots the liaison, indicating that they have no orders to return. At the castle, Canaris agrees to play chess with Baruch, and the boy wins. The admiral admires his genius, but upon learning that the boy is Jewish, he pulls out a pistol. Anya sees the man aiming at the child, and her powers activate. Guests watch in horror as everything in the hall begins to rise into the air. The admiral himself is lifted up, but at that moment Neumann grabs the girl by the shoulder. She faints, and Canaris falls to the floor. Everything stops immediately, but people scream and scatter. The furious admiral orders all children to be destroyed within 3 days and departs. Neumann escorts Anya to her room and admires her because today she managed to stop. The girl does not understand why it is necessary to destroy the Jews, and Neumann reminds her that no one pitied them either, as they were not like everyone else. The man returns to his office where Katerina awaits him, but he does not accept her attentions because he is seriously captivated by Anya and hopes to succeed with her. However, Katerina is saddened by this turn in their relationship and reminds him of Canaris's order, but Neumann intends to make a profitable deal. The action shifts to Neumann's childhood when children laughed at him and drove him away. His parents were forced to put a mask with a digital lock on him so he couldn't harm anyone, and the boy suffered greatly from this. One day his father complained to the landlord that his son was hindering his ability to fulfill his duties as a tenant, and the man came to see the unusual child. They explained to him that Neumann scared all the guests and caused his father to lose a finger. The year is 1940. The morning after the dinner, Anya goes out to the hall, but the servants who witnessed yesterday's incident look at her warily. Then the girl goes to the park where she is met by an armed Katerina, but seeing the guards, she returns to the house. Later, Neumann conducts a meditation for the teenagers, asking Thor to give them strength. Anya sees this and asks for permission to start training. Neumann orders Katerina to stay at the castle and wait for guests, and he takes Anya away. Meanwhile, the squad continues to move through the forest. Soon they find a rubber boat at the prearranged place. Neumann puts Anya on his personal plane and takes her to his parents' house. Landing, they walk across a bridge and suddenly Neumann asks the girl to remember her brother. Her powers activate. Water rises up, carrying fish and creating a reverse waterfall. But then the man calls her, Anya comes to her senses, and everything returns to normal. However, now she can use her powers when she needs to. Soon they enter an old house and Noman recalls how he was taken from his father's home. Lastly, his mother writes down the password to his mask on a piece of paper, and little Newman leaves their lives forever. In the present, he tells that his father was a harsh and cruel man, often beating him and his mother, so he promised himself that his child would never be unhappy. The man remembers how his patron removed his mask and wanted to throw it away, but Newman did not allow it. The man informed him that he would now take care of him, but he must trust him. Soon they arrived at the castle, where the patron confessed that every person has the right to be happy, and the boy lived for the first time like a normal child. But a year later, war came. His patron went away on business, and their home turned into a hospital. Neumann helped as best he could. Once he had to assist in the amputation of a leg. The soldier was in great pain, and then Neumann activated his powers and relieved the poor man of his suffering during the operation. Later he confessed to one of the nurses that he loved her. The adult woman laughed at the boy but said she loved him too. But one day he caught his nurse with one of the recovering soldiers, and in a fit of rage he made the soldier kill himself with a hammer. They caught him, gagged him, tied him up, and took him away from the castle. In 1940 he tells Anya that his parents died, so he is so happy to have found her. The girl lights candles in the fireplace, using her new powers, which delights Newman. They drink wine and then become close. At night, Anya dreams where Baruch dies and wakes up terrified. She asks Newman to return to the castle. Meanwhile, the squad reaches the river. One of the soldiers is wounded and runs out of strength. Then he takes his own life so as not to be a burden to his comrades. Only 3 remain, but they still row towards the castle. And there Katerina, who can't sleep, reminisces about the past when she helped her mother, who worked in a psychiatric hospital, where one day they brought in a tied-up boy named Neumann. She then freed him, and he promised never to harm her. The year is 1936, Leningrad. Petrov attends a lecture by Professor Ilyinsky, where he discusses a significant discovery in the field of controlling human memory and emotions. Ilyinsky's colleague, Professor Lubov, is inspired by the future changes, as people with good mental health will be able to work better and create a brilliant future for themselves and their children. The Project M envisions a new society where happy people with immense productivity and willpower will live. Petrov asks about the use of these discoveries in the military sphere, arguing that if a new society is to be built, it must be able to defend itself. However, Lyubov categorically opposes totalitarianism. After the lecture, Petrov offers Ilyinsky full support for their program if he agrees to operate under military auspices. But Ilyinsky sends him to Lyubov as the ideational inspiration behind the project. However, the woman flatly refuses to cooperate with the military. That same day, she is hit by a car in the street. Later, Petrov returns to Ilyinsky, informing him of the unfortunate accident with his colleague, and Ilyinsky reluctantly agrees to cooperate. Again, 1940-year Germany. The 3 remaining members of the squad reach the castle's territory. Surprised by the lack of security, they enter the premises. Petrov receives a summary of incidents in a specific area of Germany and realizes that everything is going according to plan. His boss is horrified. His people have left a very noticeable trail, which could easily lead to the USSR being accused of provocation. But Petrov assures him that everything was planned this way and there will be no international conflict. At that moment, his daughter calls and he rushes home. The squad members reach the castle and, splitting up, begin to explore the premises. Meanwhile, Petrov finds Vera in a hysterical state. She is going mad with worry for her husband, and the father decides to take action. At the same time in the castle, Katerina reads a book to the children, and seeing her nervousness, they calm the woman. She orders lights out and leaves, just as Ivan enters the hall from the other side. Seeing the children in front of him, the man lowers his weapon and leaves. The children remain motionless. The soldiers continue to explore the castle, and now the squad leader enters the hall with the children. But he does not lower his weapon and prepares to shoot. Then the children attack first. The commander fires in all directions, but the teenagers throw their clothes at him and knock him down. The eldest orders the pistol handed to Baruch to kill the enemy, but the boy cannot shoot the man, and the man manages to wound him with a knife before being killed. The children carry the bleeding Baruch to the bedroom, leaving the soldier's body on the hall floor. The third squad member, a female warrior, finds Katerina's office and engages her in a shootout. Katerina flees, but the woman catches up to her, and they fight. The woman is defeated when Katerina pushes her away. Seeing her opponent unconscious, the German grabs a pistol but doesn't manage to shoot because Ivan appears. Threatening him with a pistol, the woman captures him. In Moscow, Petrov brings his daughter to Professor Lyubov and asks her to erase the girl's memory. Lyubov is outraged by this request, as the love for a husband is the most precious thing in Vera's life. However, under military pressure, she agrees and performs the necessary manipulations, while Petrov's subordinates methodically clear their apartment of photographs and items belonging to Ivan. But one photograph falls under a chest of drawers, and the soldier does not notice it. After the procedure, the girl regains consciousness but does not remember her husband at all. At this time, the teenagers attack Ivan, not noticing Katerina, and wound him in the arm. The woman drives off the aggressive children and escorts the wounded man to Neuman's office, where she admits to Ivan that she recognized him because she had seen him in Madrid. He asked why her master kidnapped Anya. Could it be that he wants to use her in the war? Katerina assures him that he still doesn't understand. People are petty and greedy creatures fighting for power. Neumann is unique. He is ready to seize all power on Earth to save the world from war. Meanwhile, Neumann and Anya arrive at the castle and find a wounded woman on the threshold. The scientist finishes her off with a pistol while Anya runs to the bedroom to the teenagers and finds Baruch dead. At this time, Ivan is bandaging himself while Katerina explains that they teach the children survival by developing their skills, because their destiny is to save the world under Neumann's leadership. The woman offers to help him escape if he will help her, but before Ivan can hear her out, Neumann enters the door. The Russian immediately picks up a pistol and takes the woman hostage. However, the German informs him that he does not care about her fate, which visibly upsets her. At that moment, Anya runs into the office and uses her power to knock Ivan off his feet, but when she recognizes the man, Neumann quickly takes her away, leaving the Russian with Katerina. In Moscow, Professor Lyubov mourns Ilyinsky when Petrov brings her folders with the names of the condemned, whom she can save by including them in Squad M. She remembers how after the accident, Ilyinsky came to her in the hospital. The man was shocked to learn that she had been mutilated by the military, but he was frightened and could not refuse to cooperate. Now the woman is alone and forced to make difficult decisions. She takes out a vial of M activator and recalls Ivan's story about the man in the mask. After his return from Madrid, she worked with his memory, suggesting removing the traumatic memories of his comrades' deaths, but Ivan refused to erase his life. And now the young man is chained in a cell in the castle of the man in the mask. Later, Anya visits him, accusing him of killing Baruch, but the boy denies it, and he is not particularly interested in her fate. He only wants to destroy Neumann because all evil comes from him. He hypnotizes children, turning them into killers. Their conversation is interrupted by Naumann's appearance. After sending Anya away, he thanks the young man for revealing his vulnerability, as he is the only one who could stand up to him. To prove it, the scientist shows the finger shot off by Ivan in Madrid. He too is special, and Neumann really wants the Russian to join his side. Yes, he killed his friends, but it was war. He came to Annanerba to find gifted people. Anya is like him, and they are the future. He asks Ivan to admit why he is immune to his hypnosis. Then Ivan reveals that there is a whole squad like him, Squad M. There are many of them, and they will all be here soon. So Neumann cannot hide. After talking with Ivan, Neumann finds Anya in the castle's backyard. The girl asks him to hand over all affairs to Katerina and to leave this place forever. But Neumann does not want to run because they are extraordinary people, and when they are together they are unbeatable. He asks for her help in defending their new home. Later, he thanks Katerina for managing the situation and confesses that he is glad she was not hurt during the Russian raid. Meanwhile, Anya remembers how in Moscow she wrote letters to her brother while locked up in the laboratory. She used to give them to the professor, but she could not have imagined that he read her letters to Peter, who was undergoing mental processing as a participant in Squad M. At this time, she burns them in the backyard of the castle, hoping that life will give her a chance to start over. Later, the castle's inhabitants conduct a funeral rite for Baruch. The teenagers carry the boy's body to the seashore, where the cemetery is located, and burn it on a ritual pyre. Anya is shocked by the number of children's graves and realizes that Ivan was telling the truth. Katerina urges her to leave and save herself. Anya runs to Ivan's cell and asks him to tell her what he saw in Madrid that was so special. The boy talks about the death of his comrades and Neumann's chilling whisper, but the German doesn't know that he just had a misfire. He is not special and survived only because of the pistol's malfunction, but if Neumann finds out, he will kill him immediately. And only Anya can stand up to him. Out of the darkness comes Katerina, who has heard everything. She will let them go if they leave forever. Neumann is planning to sell the children to Canaris, and Anya can do nothing about it. They are weapons, and it is high time the Russian understood this. But Anya runs away while Katerina frees Ivan from his chains and advises him to make sure the German never finds them. Meanwhile in Moscow, Petrov enjoys his daughter's good mood, hoping she will meet another man, marry, and give him grandchildren. The girl is lively and cheerful, unaware that the photo under the dresser awaits its moment. At this time, Neumann orders the Russian man to be killed, and he goes to look for Anya. Meanwhile, Katerina leads Ivan to her car, where Neumann's guard catches up with them. He engages in a fight with the Russian, and when he is about to kill him, Katerina attacks the guard. The guard is much stronger, and Katerina has to shoot. The teenagers hear the sound and run into the courtyard while Katerina puts Ivan in the car and drives him away from the estate. Neumann finds Anya at the cemetery. The girl asks him to let the children go, but he refuses. They are insignificant to him because he hopes to build a new world using their combined powers. Moreover, they will definitely have a son who will be the strongest and greatest on the planet. Hearing this, Anya wants to leave. Then Neumann sees Katerina's car and realizes what she is about to do. He puts on his quantum mask, which greatly amplifies the power of his voice, and begins to speak while Ivan stands on the car step and aims an assault rifle at him. The mask works. Katerina's car loses control and crashes from a high cliff into the water, but Ivan manages to jump from the step and survives. Then, members of the second squad M, who were heading to the castle, covering for the distracting maneuvers of the first squad, open fire on Neumann. But the soldiers are programmed for total destruction, and one of them engages in a fight with Ivan, not realizing he is an ally. The young man has to kill the soldier. Neumann asks Anya to activate her power, and the girl begins to do so when she recognizes one of the soldiers as her brother. Neumann is knocked down by her force, rocks crash from the sky, and the girl runs to Peter, realizing that this time he is indeed dead. Anya's powers activate again when Neumann falls from Ivan's shot. The girl mourns her brother as teenagers appear on the road. Ivan grabs Anya and drags her away while the children pick up Neumann's body and carry it into the castle. The Russians run to the airplane and manage to take off at the last moment. 9 months later, Neumann, who survived the injury, listens to Hitler's speeches and experiments with a new kind of influence on people, broadcasting his voice through radio equipment. Meanwhile, in Anya's native village, a bearded Ivan arrives from the woods as his woman is about to give birth. Pregnant Anya is dragged into the village where women come to help. As the birth proceeds, an announcement about the start of the war with Germany is broadcast from the speakers. Later, surrounded by streams of power, Anya gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Neumann is immediately informed by a fortune-telling girl. Then one of the villagers recognizes Anya and hurries to tell his fellow villagers whom they have just helped. But Ivan stops him when bombers appear in the sky, from which a large number of paratroopers descend. People often fantasize about immortality. But what if a person could live for a few hundred years or thousands? What would an immortal look like? What would they do? How would they relate to family and religion? In 2007, director Richard Shankman attempted to explore these questions in the science fiction film The Man from Earth, and this fiction makes us contemplate the real. That's the case with Ja. There's a grave disorder. Is he serious? He is. The film begins with scenes of a 35-year-old man loading his belongings into the open bed of a pickup truck. 2 cars approach his house. People step out of them. Dan, Sandy, Harry, and Edith. They are colleagues and friends of the main character, Professor John Oldman. They are puzzled. Why is he planning to leave and without saying goodbye? Dan jokes that he must be in a hurry to take over a chair at Stanford, and Harry shows a basket of food, regretting that they don't have enough time. Otherwise, they would have arranged something grand. Edith notices a painting near the car. She's in awe. It looks very much like a Van Gogh, but she's never seen it before. John says it's a gift from a friend. Edith is surprised. It looks like an authentic one. John invites his friends into the house. They ask him to tell the truth. Why is he leaving his home and 10 years of teaching? John responds that he can't stay in one place for long, but his friends don't believe it. It can be that he moves so frequently. He's only 35 and he hasn't aged a bit in the last 10 years. Any woman on the faculty would give anything to know the secret. At that moment, Professor of Archaeology Art Jenkins arrives with his student, Linda. He gives John a book about prehistoric caves as a memento and also wonders where John is heading. Again, John says that he just enjoys moving around and brings out an expensive bottle of whiskey. People become more cheerful and forget about the uncomfortable questions. They form a circle and wish him a long life and good luck. On the shelf, Dan finds a strange bone artifact. It's a flint knife, a silicon tool for carving wood and bone. The Cro-Magnons used it in the Paleolithic era. While the group examines the artifact, John suddenly asks, "What do they think an Upper Paleolithic human would look like if they could have lived to the present time?" Dan replies that, as Art's book says, he could be just like any of them, and if he had lived for centuries, he would have changed with each passing century, meaning that the Upper Paleolithic people had the same intelligence as modern humans, they just knew less. Linda is curious, according to the biologist, what would sustain his life. Biologist Harry says that it would require complete cell regeneration. It is believed that the human body is designed for a lifespan of around 190 years. Edith laments, as many would love to know the secret of eternal life. Harry responds that what is magic for one time is science for another. After all, Columbus and Copernicus were once considered mad. And then John reveals that he could have traveled with Columbus, but he isn't the adventurous type. Moreover, he was already convinced that Earth was round. However, back then he still believed that there was an edge somewhere that one could fall off. The friends give uncertain smiles, thinking it's a joke, right? But John denies it. Every 10 years or so, people start to notice that he doesn't age and he has to leave. The friends are puzzled. Is he saying he's a Cro-Magnon? John explains that at least for the last 4,000 years, since the time of Mesopotamia, he's been sure of it. In his first life, he lived to about 35 years old and became the leader of his tribe because they believed he was a sorcerer. He didn't even have to fight for it. But then fear arose and they banished him. People believed he was stealing their life force to remain young. He was pursued because he wouldn't die. That's how the habit of joining new tribes he encountered along the way emerged. At first, John thought something was wrong with him. Maybe he was evil and that's why he couldn't die. Then he thought he might be cursed, or on the contrary, blessed. Later, he believed there was some purpose to his existence, and now he thinks he simply came into being. His friends are intrigued. John's story is full of interest. Edith is curious again about the fate of the Van Gogh painting. And John tells them that Van Gogh gave him the painting when John was just born, a pig farmer. Van Gogh used to visit him, paint, and talk about how nature finds its reflection in art. Art asks, "Did you always leave?" John shrugs. Sometimes he created a new identity for the next 10 years. Sometimes he even posed as his own son. But a few times he got caught. He even spent a year in a Belgian prison in 1862 for forging state documents. His friends start to get annoyed. John seems to have an answer to everything except one. Why does he do it? And he answers, he just wanted them to say goodbye to him specifically. After this, those around him conclude that John has serious issues. He remembers about moving. He still needs to take the boxes. While the man is carrying his belongings, Harry tries to find hidden microphones or cameras. People just can't believe that what is happening is real. At the car, Sandy confesses her love to John. He says that she's not indifferent to him either. But now she understands what she's getting into, right? Because one day he'll be forced to leave. He cannot give her eternity. But she objects. What is eternity, and who has it? Her parents divorced even before she was born. Besides, there's death, illness, insurmountable circumstances. Nobody knows how much time they have, whether it's a lot or little. She loves him and will accept everything he can give her. John and Sandy return to the house. Their friends say that they still have more questions. For example, does he remember any of his native languages? The man replies that he remembers a little. Besides, they haven't changed much. And did he engage in cave painting? Yes, he knew a man named Daru who was excellent at his work. He painted animals that hunters hoped to kill and eat. Once, after an unsuccessful hunt, the leader knocked out all his teeth for failing with his magic. After that, someone had to chew his food for him. Eventually, he developed jawbone inflammation and they abandoned him. Then John headed east. It was at the beginning of the Bronze Age. He walked along trade routes and learned the languages of the places he visited. Everywhere there were myths about the creation of the world and new gods. He was a Sumerian for 2,000 years, then a Babylonian during Hammurabi's reign. For some time he sailed as a Phoenician. It seems he spent his whole life on the road and learned a few new tricks. He even staged his own death a couple of times. He made it to India and met Buddha, the most remarkable person he had ever encountered. Buddha taught John many things he had never pondered before. In the midst of the debate, Dr. Will Gruber arrives. The doctor says that there's absolutely no way for John to prove the truth of his story, and no way they could verify it. He's either their friend, or a caveman, or a liar, or a lunatic. The doctor is curious. In this extensive life being discussed, did he ever get sick? John answers affirmatively. Like everyone else, he had serious illnesses, perhaps pneumonia or other lung infections. He suffered from typhoid, yellow fever, and smallpox. He survived the bubonic plague, and it's even more horrifying than history tells. But he doesn't have any scars. Among the friends, a debate flares up, whether to believe John's stories or not. They contradict all their notions about nature. Dan is puzzled. A person with John's intellect would have studied a lot of things. John confesses he has 10 scientific degrees, including all those his friends have. He earned his biology doctorate at Oxford in 1840, but his achievements are just an excess of time, not brilliance. Suddenly, Dr. Will pulls out a gun. He asks John if he would survive if he is shot, but John never claimed he was immortal, just very old. The doctor is curious. What does John think about death? Is he afraid of it? John explains that ancient people thought about death, but they had a practical understanding. They stopped moving, fell, and never got up. Infections were incomprehensible. Aging was the biggest mystery. So at first, John thought that everyone around him was wrong. After all, they aged and died. And again, the friends ask, what is it like for a person when everyone they knew has died? The doctor asks John about his parents, but he says he only remembers glimpses. The doctor remarks that it's not surprising. He too remembers his father very vaguely. Will starts reasoning about what's fair and what's not. They will all die and he will keep on living. If that's true, it's not surprising that they might feel envy and even hatred. He accuses John. The others are outraged and try to stop the doctor, but he says that John is living an unjust life. Perhaps it's time for him to die. The doctor leaves, and then Harry informs everyone that Will's wife died yesterday, which is why he's so aggressive. John runs after his friend to apologize. Meanwhile, the others discuss John. The theory of illness comes up. John returns. The next question from his friends is whether there are others like him. The man admits that in the 17th century he met someone like him, and that person told him everything, confirming that he was just like John, but from a different time and place. They talked for 2 days and then parted ways. Edith asks if he believes in God. The friends become engaged as religious questions are close to everyone. Did he meet anyone from the Bible? Was he a part of religious history? Numerous theories are suggested. Edith is outraged, considering it blasphemy. John recounts that he once encountered Buddha and he liked what he heard. He had been contemplating the teachings for 500 years. Then he became Etruscan and infiltrated the Roman Empire. He didn't like how it turned into a massive killing machine. He went to the Middle East, thinking of passing on Buddha's teachings in a renewed form. He tried, but he was one dissident against Rome. Rome won, and the rest is well known. So John was Jesus? Yes, during the crucifixion he blocked the pain. He learned this technique in Tibet. He also slowed down bodily processes so much that they couldn't be detected. Everyone thought he died. They took him down from the cross and laid him in a cave. When he regained consciousness, he wanted to leave unnoticed, but a bunch of fanatics wouldn't let him do that. So he resurrected and headed to Central Europe. He can't prove it, he has no scars, and besides, they tied him down. But blood and nails look more convincing on icons. Edith is outraged. John deeply hurt her feelings. The friends start discussing religious questions. John says that he preached that Christ's teachings were about tolerance, brotherhood, and love. Life is here on earth, here and now. But then the talking serpent persuaded a woman to eat the apple, and everything went awry. Heaven and hell became tools for priests to rule with reward and punishment, trying to save souls that people never lost. John observes rituals, ceremonies, processions, genuflections, the moans of singers and choirs, and he thinks this is not what he meant. At this time, Dr. Will returns. The debates about religion, Christianity, and piety continue. The friends racked their brains. Was it the fabrication, a mental disorder, drugs? But they can't find a solution. John completely baffled the four scientists. He continues to explain that religion is not what is happening now. The church grew out of fairy tales. Even the name Jesus grew out of John. He never claimed to be the Son of God. He wanted to share knowledge. He did not walk on water or resurrect the dead. The friends gather to leave, although they are excited by his story. Edith pleads again to say that he's not Jesus, and she starts crying. The lights come on. Will demands that he admit that it was all a joke. And then John confesses that it was just a story. Their outrage knows no bounds. But John says that they themselves pushed him to this thought. They said he doesn't age. Edith saw Van Gogh, then found the chisel. They themselves bought into his game, and he couldn't resist seeing how they would react to his words. After all, he had such a splendid audience. An anthropologist, an archaeologist, an expert in Christianity, a psychologist, and a biologist. Linda, standing in the doorway, asks if the name Oldman is a play on words, old man. The infuriated people leave except for Will. He stays in the room and John sees his friends off. Sandy asks, what other telltale names did he come up with for himself? And John starts listing. John Political, John Hermit, and about 60 years ago when he was teaching at Harvard, he was John Thomas Party. Will's voice is heard. Wait, 60 years ago? John Party? John turns to him and says that his mother's name was Nola. Will initially denies every word, but in tears he confirms Nola was his mum. But he can't believe it, and he asks for the name of their dog. John names it Woofy, and he asks if she got married again. Will says he feels cold, and John pities the old man. He was always cold. Will tries to touch his face. His father had a beard, and John confirms that he always checked if it was real. Will collapses. An ambulance and police car arrive at the house. They carry Will's body on a stretcher, covering it with a sheet over his head. Everyone leaves. Sandy asks if he has seen his adult child die before. John shakes his head. He gets into the car and drives away from the house. Sandy looks at him. The car stops at the bend. Smiling, she walks towards it. The Man from Earth is a very ambiguous movie. However, it makes you wonder. It raises very complex questions about morality, ethics, and religion. It is fascinating to follow the flight of human thought and to think, what if?
You, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman.
One beautiful day, an ordinary family is celebrating a child's birthday. Dad is grilling barbecue, Mom is chatting with friends, while the kids are amazed by a cowboy's lasso throwing skills. Later, the children go to eat cake, and Cooper's daughter suddenly freezes, staring at the horizon. The man turns around and sees a huge nuclear mushroom cloud rising over the city. The next minute, the blast wave reaches their home. The owner hides his family in a shelter, while Cooper and his daughter jump on a horse and ride away as nuclear mushrooms rise behind him. 219 years have passed. Lucy is a young woman who possesses many skills and lives in shelter number 33 with her father and brother Norman. Unfortunately, it's impossible to find a man who wouldn't be related to her. Therefore, the council decides to allow her to take a husband from another colony. The happy girl puts on the communal wedding dress, while her neighbors, led by her father, the shelter's warden, prepare tables for the wedding, displayed in a field surrounded by a 3D image of distant mountains. The father is happy for his daughter, regretting that her mother didn't live to see her wedding. Then comes the moment when people head to the portal, guarded by the gatekeeper Chad, Lucy's cousin. He has long loved the girl but must admit the fairness of genetic ethics. The young man presses a button, the portal opens, letting in a delegation from a neighboring colony. Their leader reminds that for fresh blood, they must receive seeds and spare parts for machinery, and a young man is brought to Lucy. Their marriage is registered, and everyone sits at the tables. The shelter's residents notice that the guests are rather uncouth but decide not to focus on this. Lucy's father delivers a speech, hoping that the next generation might finally live on the surface. People dance and enjoy themselves, much to Norman's displeasure. The groom asks the girl to show him the bedroom, and she leads him to the room. The young couple begins to perform their duties while Norman patrols the colony and suddenly finds the body of one of the colonists. And Lucy unexpectedly hears a distant scream. She puts on a universal bracelet, which instantly shows that her young husband is infected with radiation, indicating he came from the surface. Realizing he's been found out, he lunges at her and throws her against the wall. Dazed, the girl watches as the guy takes a knife and prepares to kill her. Lucy remembers her skills and tries to take the knife, but the man stabs her in the side. At that moment, an alarm sounds. The man gets distracted, and Lucy knocks him out with a vase hit to the head, then administers first aid to herself and rushes to the armory, where she finds a pistol and hurries to the room where her fellow tribesmen remained. She kills an alien she encounters, but upon leaving the room, she witnesses a real battle. Lucy manages to save Norman when her unmade husband appears, but her father drowns the son-in-law in a barrel of water and rushes to a signal about a breach in the doors. Lucy runs after him and freezes in front of a team of aliens who have taken the shelter's residents hostage. The attacker's leader offers the man a choice: his fellow tribesman or Lucy. As the girl tries to understand what this means, her father locks her in a compartment, after which his captors take him with them from the surface when an explosion destroys the gates. Meanwhile, on the surface of the earth, in the Brotherhood of Steel barracks, young men are beating one of them, Paladin Maximus. His friend helps the guy recover and leads him to classes where they are taught useful wasteland skills, as soon they will serve as knights. They are seekers and guardians, and must be able to distinguish ancient artifacts. At this time, to the Paladin's great admiration, Steel Knights arrive at the base. Later, the friend leads Maximus to a hangar where their armor is stored, to look at them. Later, Maximus hears cries of jubilation and finds out that some of them were promoted. Among them is his friend, who will become the assistant to Knight Titus. But in the morning, the barracks are awakened by a wild scream. It turns out that someone put a blade in the future assistant's boot, and the girl severely injured her foot. Maximus is arrested and led to the Brotherhood's leader. In the shelter, order is being restored. Lucy is stitching up her stomach wound, and people gather for a council meeting. She requests that a squad be assembled and sent to the surface to search for her father. However, the council refuses to do this. Lucy then gathers the necessary items and heads to the gates, accompanied by her brother. Chad rushes to go with her, but she sedates him and says goodbye to Norman. The gates open and the girl steps onto the surface. She surveys the world of sand, where traces of the past tragedy still linger, and walks towards the sea. Maximus is accused of maiming a comrade out of envy, but he denies it. The leader realizes the boy is not guilty and appoints him as an assistant to the Steel Knight. The next day, the leader assigns the knights and their assistants the task of finding a escaped scientist who has stolen a very important object. Knight Titus and Maximus load up on a helicopter and fly to their designated sector. At the same time, a band of bounty hunters lures a wild ghoul from the grave to find this scientist heading to the witch Moldover, with whom the ghoul has old ties. Unexpectedly, the ghoul shoots the hunters and sets off on his own accord. Lucy travels across the surface and one day stops to camp near an abandoned house. She makes a fire and falls asleep by it. She awakens to strange sounds and sees a dog devouring a huge insect. A man sitting by her fire explains that the cockroaches not only survived the nuclear blasts, they mutated and are now very dangerous. He advises the girl to return to the shelter as she does not know the rules of the outer world, but Lucy is obliged to find her father. The man leaves. Meanwhile, the Steel Knight and Maximus land in the right sector. Near their landing spot, the fugitive scientist and his dog hide in a cave. Sometime later, the knight and his assistant arrive there. Maximus immediately finds the sought-after scientist's tracks, and the knight heads into the cave. Maximus is also forced to go with him, though he has no armor. Inside, a giant mutant cave bear attacks them. The knight engages in combat, but the beast overpowers him, and Titus suddenly starts to run. Maximus barely manages to kill the huge beast. The knight turns out to be a weak man who blames and insults the boy. Then Maximus refuses to revive the wounded knight and lets him die, deciding to find the fugitive himself. He dons the armor himself and learns to use it. The boy is amazed at how his strength has increased and the boundless opportunities that have opened up before him. Incidentally, he saves a weakling, although it turns out that the person was not very good. He realizes that he needs to figure out who is worthy of protection first. Lucy reaches a town where she was advised to look for traces of her father's kidnappers. She enters one of the shops, where an elderly saleswoman, recognizing her as a shelter resident, advises the girl to leave this place. Shelters are underground havens where the rich hid while the world perished, so no one here will help her. The girl goes outside where the scientist with the dog approaches her again, surprised that she is still here. But then the saleswoman, who turns out to be waiting for him, calls out to him. And suddenly, the ghoul appears, who has also come for the scientist. He intends to take him when the saleswoman promises money to anyone who helps protect the scientist. Then the ghoul shoots the scientist in the leg to prevent him from escaping and engages in battle with those who want the reward. The ghoul shoots everyone while Lucy sneaks into the shop, finds the order book, and learns the address of Moldover. She wants to leave, but sees how the ghoul injures the scientist's dog and hears his plea for help. She stands up for him and shoots the ghoul with a capsule, which only makes him laugh. Then a knight lands in front of the ghoul. Maximus asks the girl to look after the scientist while he fights the ghoul. She and the saleswoman take the injured scientist into the shop, where the woman attaches an iron leg to him and offers to accompany him to Moldover, giving her the coordinates. The pair leave while the ghoul fights the knight and quickly finds his weak spot. Maximus has not yet mastered all the advantages of the suit, which costs him losing his navigation ability. The Iron Knight is thrown far from the shop, and at that moment, the ghoul realizes that his target has escaped. Meanwhile, Lucy and the scientist stop to rest, and the girl watches in horror at the scientist's bloodied leg. She realizes they won't make it, and the man confirms this. He confesses that he will soon die, but she must definitely deliver his head to Moldover. He pulls out a saw and dies. Sometime later, the ghoul finds the headless body of the scientist amidst the sandy wasteland and follows the tracks of Lucy, who is carrying the head to Moldover. Soon the girl stops to rest and, after snacking, examines the head, wondering what is so special about it. Just in case, she inserts a tracking device into its nostril. Maximus examines the armor and finds a malfunction. Suddenly, he is called from the base, which surprises him. He reports the death of his assistant and is promised a replacement, though he vehemently opposes this. The boy heads to the nearest town, where he finds a workshop and, paying all the money he has, repairs the broken module. But when he returns to the suit, he discovers a gang of local marauders trying to dismantle the armor for scrap metal. He engages in a fight, but is hit hard in the face. The boy regains consciousness to see that the armor has been breached. He grabs a piece of metal lying nearby and uses it to destroy the attackers. Then he sees a helicopter arriving, dropping off a new assistant. The assistant turns out to be one of his tormentors from the training camp. Maximus manages to close the helmet, and the new assistant does not notice the substitution. Lucy reaches the place where Hollywood once stood. She stops by a pond when an unknown monster attacks her, snatching the backpack with the scientist's head and disappearing into the water. Lucy tries to track the thief but is caught in the ghoul's sights, to whom she explains what happened with the head. At this time, the shelter council conducts an investigation into Lucy's escape, after which Norman realizes that no one intends to search for either his father or sister. In the desert, Maximus torments the assistant with various misdeeds, avenging past humiliations, but the latter continues to serve the Steel Knight willingly. They find the ghoul's tracks with a special device, follow them, and find the headless body of the scientist. Meanwhile, the ghoul sets up a hunt for the underwater monster, using the girl as bait. Soon, the beast emerges onto the shore. It grabs Lucy, but the ghoul manages to pull her out. The girl barely manages to fend off the attack, but the underwater monster escapes, taking her boot. The enraged ghoul drags Lucy along. At this time, the Steel Knight's assistant fills the armor with water, talking about his life. Suddenly, Maximus asks him to talk about himself. The boy confesses that in fact he was a decent guy, and they beat him as part of the tradition like any other newbie. Now he regrets that Maximus didn't live to be called up for service. They move on and soon reach the pond. The pair enters the water and immediately sees the monster. Maximus demands the assistant to go ashore and takes on the fight himself, but the boy shoots at the creature and it chases after him. Maximus manages to pull the boy from the monster's jaws, and it dies, spitting out the scientist's head and Lucy's boot in its last act. Then a dog runs up to them, which continues on with them. The ghoul leads Lucy through the wasteland, denying her water, and soon they arrive at the place where a movie studio once stood, where actor Cooper and his wife worked. Soon they reach an abandoned clinic from which male screams can be heard. Entering, they find an old acquaintance of the ghoul, undergoing mutation and suffering because of it. The condition could be alleviated with special medication, but the ghoul doesn't have any, so the ghoul relieves the poor soul from his misery. The girl doesn't understand why he did it, but he explains they need something to eat. The girl mentions that they also had it tough but never ate their own kind. Then the ghoul forces Lucy to cut up the body to take this meat with them. They continue on, although it becomes increasingly difficult for the girl without water. Soon the ghoul stops in front of a structure where radioactive water has accumulated. Lucy can't resist and starts drinking it, earning her companion's approval. She is finally beginning to understand the life of the wasteland. He is her future, and it won't be long now. Then he coughs, and Lucy tries to use this moment to escape, but stops in front of a huge crater, where she gets caught in his lasso. She tries to break free and accidentally bites off the ghoul's finger, for which he cuts off one of her fingers. Soon they reach an old supermarket, where the ghoul offers the woman in exchange for the items he needs. Stunned, Lucy enters the building, not noticing that the ghoul falls into unconsciousness. Inside, she is greeted by a robot. It invites Lucy to follow and implants a new finger for her. Then it pities her and confesses it will just take her organs, and immediately sedates her. Later in the shelter, Norman is delivering food to the aliens captured during an attack, and one of them confesses that the inhabitants of shelter number 32, which they captured before this, were planning something very bad. Norman tries to access the network to find information about shelter number 32, but the data are classified. Together with Chad, they clear the debris and penetrate shelter number 32, where they find a devastated field in the desiccated corpses of the inhabitants. But if they were dead when the aliens arrived, it turns out they killed each other. Lucy wakes up and sees many women locked in glass cabinets, ready to be dissected for organs. The robot prepares to open her chest cavity, but cuts her bonds instead, and she wriggles out from under its saw and disables the robot. Then she fills syringes with drain cleaner, reprograms the robot, and in its company, goes to the owners of the dreadful place. She forces them to release the prisoners, and people flee. But not all. Lucy forces the opening of the last cages. The owners comply, and out come zombies, who immediately tear apart two organ traders. Lucy surveys the battlefield in horror as the last zombie prepares to attack her, but she finds a pistol in her hand. Norman and Chad continue their inspection of the neighboring shelter and learn that its door was open from the outside with a key bearing the name of Norman and Lucy's mother. And Lucy finds medicine to sustain the ghoul's life, and despite the torture she endured, she hands the medication to the ghoul. Maybe she will look like him on the outside. but inside, she will never be like him. The girl leaves, and the ghoul goes into the shattered store and takes the necessary meds to bring himself to a relative semblance of order. Then he stuffs his hat with medicines. But then, he notices a video recorder, puts in an old tape where Cooper plays a cowboy, and sits down in front of the television. Maximus and his assistant settle down to rest. Thaddeus cannot contain his delight at being rescued, as knights rarely treat their assistants kindly. He asks to be branded. Maximus obliges and lifts his helmet. However, upon recognizing him, the assistant attacks, resulting in Maximus breaking his leg. But Thaddeus manages to extract a nuclear core from the armor, immobilizing the exoskeleton, and leaves, taking the scientist's head with him. Giant cockroaches immediately attack the immobilized suit. Maximus, terrified, awaits his death when the insects scatter from gunfire, and Lucy approaches the knight. She explains why she needs the scientist's head and helps the man out of the suit, and he gives her medication for radiation sickness. When Lucy recovers, she suggests they go after the head together, since she has a tracker. They will hand it over to the Brotherhood, in return for which the knights will help her find her father. Maximus agrees. At the same time, in Shelter 33, instead of her father, Betty is elected as the warden. Norman dislikes this and studies the history of the shelter. Suddenly, he realizes that all caretakers were selected from the residents of Shelter 31. Lucy and Maximus reach a bridge where they are stopped by a pair of vagrants. They pretend to be scared and ask for permission to pass. The couple, raising their hands, tries to walk away. However, the suspicious Maximus manages to shoot first, saving their lives, though he injures his hand, and Lucy realizes how naive the shelter's residents are. Soon they reach a billboard of the new Californian Republic. The girl is upset because they live with the belief that they are meant to revive America, but it turns out everything has already happened on the surface. Maximus reassures her, as there is no republic anyway. Soon they arrive at a huge crater in the middle of the city. The boy confesses that he survived this hell by hiding in a refrigerator, but then Lucy realizes that Maximus's wound is much more serious and leads him to a building with a clinic sign. Maximus lags behind, and when he enters, the girl is nowhere to be found. He searches for her and enters a chamber between two doors. The space fills with gas, causing the boy to lose consciousness. Betty leads her people to Shelter 32 to announce a partial relocation, as these resources are too valuable. Chad and Norman are surprised to see that the bodies have been removed and all traces of the tragedy have disappeared. Norman inquires about the whereabouts of his mother's key after her death. Betty confesses that they buried the woman with it. Maximus and Lucy come to in the shelter on stretchers. Maximus receives medical care. The shelter leader asks the couple to stay, as the boy needs treatment. Moreover, the suppliers have found armor and will soon deliver it here. Lucy thanks them for the refuge, and the leader informs her that she was born on the surface like many of them. The couple spends several hours in quarantine. From the conversation, it turns out that Maximus never knew a woman's love. Lucy is ready to teach him this art, as it is considered natural in the shelter, but the boy is embarrassed. Moreover, it is not customary among knights. Later, they go to lunch, where they suddenly notice that many of the surrounding people have various physical deformities. The caretaker turns out to be a cyclops. For Lucy, this is strange, but Maximus does not understand her concern. Later, the caretaker confesses to Lucy that they accept people from the surface, which surprises the girl since this was strictly forbidden in her shelter. But when she asks about the forbidden level they were advised not to visit, the caretaker immediately ends the conversation. Maximus finds a room where a nuclear block is installed, powering the entire underground. The leader hands him an electronic key to his personal compartment and suggests he rest a bit. The boy enters, and upon entering, he is amazed to see a basket filled with various delicacies and things he has never seen before. For the first time in his life, he takes a real shower, puts on a robe and slippers, and indulges in unknown products. Meanwhile, Lucy finds a room where the entire history of the Californian Republic is vividly described. It turns out that life here was revived in 2142 but was destroyed in 2277. Lucy is horrified, wondering who needed a new war and why. But then all the shelter inhabitants hear a sound signal and head to the designated place. Meanwhile, a ghoul is caught by the so-called new president of the territory, who owned a supermarket trading in organs, and the ghoul is blamed for its destruction. However, he calmly asks for a needle and thread to sew his finger back on and asks for directions to find Moldover. but the president orders the ghoul to be killed. The ghoul has to destroy the new law enforcers and search for the woman himself. Lucy comes with everyone to a room, in the center of which stands an altar with burning candles. People begin to sing something, moving their hands, and Lucy gradually falls into a trance, supporting the others. Unexpectedly, people start to undress, which shocks Lucy. A bowl goes around, from which everyone takes some powder and smears their faces, and suddenly Lucy realizes with horror that it is the ashes of the deceased. In another bowl there is blood. People call to the Mother of Flame, who must save them, and an image of Moldover unfolds above their heads. A frightened Lucy runs to Maximus and urges him to run away quickly, but the boy has just found himself in such paradisiacal conditions and does not want to leave. So Lucy heads to the forbidden level. She enters a laboratory where apparently some genetic experiments on people were conducted. The girl is horrified as she examines the gruesome exhibits and notices glass cryocapsules containing human bodies. But then the lights turn on and a man in a white coat enters. Lucy hides, but he hears a noise, follows it, and finds the girl. Lucy fights, but the men who arrive seize her and drag her to the upper level. Meanwhile, the ghoul arrives at the digger's house, whose eldest son knows the location of Moldover. The frightened man orders the boy to tell everything he knows, and he admits that the woman can be found at the observatory. But when the ghoul is about to leave, the boy tries to kill him and pays with his life for it. At the same time, the shelter leaders shame Lucy as they had given her refuge, fed her, and healed her friend, but the girl is furious because she has seen what they do to people. Then they show her the complete recording of the attack on the laboratory of the very monster that almost devoured her too. It was the first inhabitants of the shelter who experimented on people, turning them into monsters. They are only trying to alleviate the pain of those who survived. The fact is that each shelter specializes in some experiment, and Lucy just doesn't know this. Nevertheless, she must be punished for her disobedience. The girl is led away, which Maximus sees. Thaddeus makes a stop to rest and realizes that his leg is in very bad condition. A dog bothers him, and he locks it in a metal box, then sets off to find a radio tower to contact the Brotherhood. At this time, the inhabitants of the shelter sentence Lucy to exile to the surface. Moreover, they supply her with a stock of food. The girl is stunned, as this is exactly what she wanted. Nevertheless, in her last words, she asks them to allow her friend to stay. But then Maximus appears in knight's armor, into which he has inserted the nuclear block he just stole. He scatters the men when the girl stops him, as they are letting her go anyway. They go up to the surface, and learning that he stole the nuclear block, Lucy convinces him to return it, as the shelter cannot survive without energy. They drop the block down, and Lucy, moved, calls him a good person. Then he confesses that he allowed a knight to perish and took his armor, so he is not a good person at all, but he really wants to go with her. Thaddeus is caught up by a man who calls himself a doctor and promises to fix his leg. He takes the boy to an abandoned clinic where, in exchange for a nuclear block, he gives him a potion that, when drunk, Thaddeus ecstatically sees his leg heal. Meanwhile, the ghoul finds the locked dog that Thaddeus left behind, and it leads him on Thaddeus's trail. At the same time, the boy reaches the radio station, around which traps are set that tear those who come too close to pieces. Thaddeus sends a signal to the Brotherhood and, waiting for their arrival, chats with the radio station owner about music. Then Maximus and Lucy appear. The girl asks for the scientist's head. The boy accidentally steps on a trap and an arrow pierces his neck. But strangely, he does not think of dying, and then Maximus realizes that he has become a zombie. Thaddeus is upset. He should not have trusted the unfamiliar doctor, but now the path to the Brotherhood is closed for him, as they would kill him immediately. At that moment, copters appear on the horizon. Maximus suggests to Titus to give him the scientist's head and run, and the boy takes this opportunity. Then Maximus gives the head to Lucy and picks up a head of some unfortunate lying nearby, torn apart in a trap. He asks the girl to run, and she kisses him and promises to wait in shelter 33. Some inhabitants of shelter number 33 begin to receive notifications about relocation to the neighboring block. Seizing the opportunity, Norman enters the caretaker system, deceitfully gains access to shelter 31, and heads there. The arriving servants take Maximus and bring him to the camp. The boy hands over the head he obtained to the leader and confesses that his knight perished. After finding nothing in the head, they sentence him to death. and then his friend confesses that she had cut her own leg because she was scared to go searching. Maximus shouts that he knows where to find the real head. The leader orders him to be released, and everyone prepares for a performance. At that time, Lucy reaches the observatory where her father is sitting in a cage. Sitting at the table, Moldaver greets the girl, who is horrified to see a dried-up, yet still living mummy seated next to the hostess. The girl is willing to give her the head in exchange for freedom. Moldaver extracts a vial from the head and offers to listen to the real story of her father. Although he begs his daughter not to listen, the woman begins her story. Meanwhile, Norman finds a robot with a human brain in the secret shelter 31, which immediately tries to inject him with something. The boy barely dodges the crazy machine. Moldaver's story transports Lucy to the distant pre-war years when actor Cooper, agitated by his wife's talks of an impending nuclear war, decides to follow her. He comes to her work and listens to a corporate council meeting through a bug he planted on his wife. Billionaires discuss the decline in sales worldwide. Then they move on to the topic of shelters. Someone does not understand their necessity, arguing that if anyone survives on the surface, those emerging from the shelters will simply be killed. They counter that one could live underground for centuries, as there are vast reserves. Time is their main weapon. One could simply outlive the rest. A debate erupts among the corporate leaders, interrupted by Cooper's wife. She thinks primarily of her daughter and wants to secure the best future for her. In the future, Norman reaches a room where rows of cryo capsules stand with the names of those who slept in them, including all the wardens, his father among them. The action returns to the past, where Cooper's wife reveals that over 100 shelters have been built across America, so each of them could fulfill their wildest dreams. In the future, the robot explains to Norman that all these people were selected for their creative thinking and positivity. They are the country's best gene pool, destined to revive the nation after the surface is cleansed. In the past, the debate flares up again, as destroying so many people is not easy. Then Cooper's wife suggests to start the war themselves. A nuclear war is a tragedy, but also the greatest opportunity to start anew, because then there will be no one left to fight. They will become monopolists of the entire world. At this point, Cooper is distracted by a young man who would like to get an autograph, and this is Lucy's young father. In the present, Moldaver explains that the man has lived for a very long time. He is part of the corporation that orchestrated all this horror, but he never spoke about it to his wife. She was very smart. It was she who discovered that something was draining water from the shelter. She realized that civilization had returned, but her husband mocked her. Then the woman took the children and fled. They found a wonderful city, but her father came with his men and burned it down. Lucy brought Moldaver the cold fusion she developed and stolen by corporations, infinite energy with which life can be revived. Lucy sees a pendant on the mummy's neck that belonged to her mother and realizes what happened to her. Her father begs her not to believe Moldaver, but the girl demands that he give her the synthesis code. He relents and provides the numbers. The woman leaves for the laboratory to start the cold fusion process. Meanwhile, the robot informs Norman that it will not let him leave after what he has learned. At the same time, Lucy's father pleads with her to open the cage and return home, just as an alarm sounds and Brotherhood copters appear over the observatory, opening fire on the people below. Knights and their assistants descend to the ground and engage in battle with the observatory's defenders. Maximus rushes forward, searching for Lucy, while the knights wreak havoc around. Soon the knights burst inside the building, where they are suddenly stopped by a ghoul. It turns out he too once wore armor and knows their vulnerabilities. Thus he easily shoots the Iron Knights, remaining unharmed himself. At this time Lucy cries, torn between her father's pleas to come home and the terrible situation of her mother. But then at the room's threshold, a wounded knight falls, followed by Maximus. He opens the cage and rushes to Lucy. However, the girl confesses that it was her father who destroyed his wonderful city. Her father, meanwhile, dons armor and throws Maximus aside, knocking him unconscious. The girl pulls out a gun, but then the ghoul enters the room. When he learned Lucy's surname, he couldn't believe that this was the same guy from the corporation. He had waited over 200 years to find out where his family was. Lucy's father activates jet engines and flees. However, it turns out that this was exactly what the ghoul needed, as the man leaves a trail that can easily be followed to the place where the world's rulers are hiding, those who orchestrated the nuclear war. He urges Lucy to come with him. Then Lucy shoots the mummy, says goodbye to the unresponsive Maximus, and follows the ghoul. At the same time, an injured Moldover returns to the room where Maximus regains consciousness. She has activated the nuclear synthesis, and now people have infinite energy. A stunned Maximus watches as surviving lanterns light up over the ruins of the city, while Moldover smiles and dies. The Brotherhood members who rush in think their comrade killed the woman and celebrate Maximus as a future knight. Meanwhile, the ghoul and Lucy follow the trail of her father, who heads through the desert to a distant city. The series ends there. A man discovers a loophole in the universe and travels back in time to retrieve his wife and job, while also finding out the winning lottery numbers to become wealthy. I think you and I can do this together the right way. 2016. Attorney Patrick Landry introduces his partner, Philip Grimmer, to Evelyn's sister. Love at first sight happens, although the girl warns of her upcoming departure to Prague and asks not to get attached. 6 years later, the couple wakes up in the same bed. Phil immediately rushes to his laptop while Ev answers a call from her mother, who invites them to dinner for her birthday. However, Phil, as always, doesn't listen to his wife. His mind is preoccupied with work issues. Realizing this, the woman allows her husband not to go with her and asks him to repeat it on camera. Later, Philip argues with the builders who can't seem to finish the renovation of their house. The foreman complains about the absence of the homeowner's brother Andy, whom they hired at his request, and irritated Phil promises to find another carpenter. On the way to work, Phil justifies Andy in every way, ignoring his wife's request to turn left, which leads to a traffic jam. Ev says she's taking the subway because she needs to go somewhere else. Philip, on the other hand, goes to his brother, who overslept. The crucial thing is that he hasn't consumed alcohol, which is strictly forbidden for him because he's an alcoholic. After sending his brother to work, Phil rushes to the company as it's an important day for them. He texts his wife, hoping she's already there, but she asks for a conversation which her husband once again doesn't hear. Later, they all gather at the same table because they work for the same company they own. Patrick complains about the lack of a secretary in their team, so Ev has to work much more. Still, Phil reminds them that today they will make a deal with Kiss Company, and money won't be a problem anymore. In the evening, Patrick presents his part of the presentation, while Phil works on his own. Finally, after finishing everything, the man goes home, only to find the bedroom painted blue and his wife asleep. In the morning, Ev wakes him up with a question about the bedroom color. However, her husband refuses to discuss this trivial matter and rushes to meet with representatives of the Kiss Company, which specializes in building mines for valuable minerals. The lawyers are convinced that they are the best to mediate with the locals who oppose the project. Afterward, Phil rushes home with champagne to celebrate their success with his wife, but Ev meets him with her things packed, as she intends to leave him. She reminds him of numerous instances when he ignored her interests and departs. Phil roams around the house, not knowing what to do, but then remembers the invitation from his mother-in-law and goes to Evelyn's parents' home. However, the woman refuses to talk to him, and to prevent a scandal, Patrick takes his friend to a bar. He confesses that he knew about his sister's intentions but kept quiet because of a contract. Disheartened, Phil heads to the restroom, where he stumbles upon an ad inviting him to use Plan B and correct his mistakes. All evening he tries to find his wife, but she is nowhere to be found, and she doesn't answer his calls. The man dials the agency's number and, not entirely sure what he's doing, names the date of the day he'd like to return to. Specifically, yesterday morning. In the morning, Phil wakes up to find Andy working in his living room. Due to the events of the previous day, his head isn't functioning well, and he is surprised to read a message from Plan B. Then, there's a knock on the door, and two identical guys appear on the doorstep, grabbing Phil and dragging him into a van parked outside. After this, he wakes up 2 days earlier. Bewildered, Phil, without allowing his wife to finish, agrees to go to her mother's birthday party, which astonishes Evelyn. He also requests the foreman to find a replacement for his brother. On the way, stuck in traffic again, he follows his wife and discovers her at a clinic, where a surprised Ev mentions a delay. Phil doesn't understand why she didn't tell him earlier, but she suggests discussing it later. He waits for her in the car, where his wife admits she considered their relationship over. Her husband pleads for another chance and asks her to remind him what color she wanted for the bedroom. He then calls the foreman, who has already painted the walls blue, orders him to stop, and later fires Andy. At work, Phil takes on all of Ev's extra work, which leaves him with no time to complete his part of the presentation. While his wife goes to meet a friend, he rushes home and paints the walls in her favorite color. Catching him in the act, Evelyn is surprised, but counts it as an effort. Furthermore, he apologizes for her having to do something she doesn't love, despite always dreaming of being a musician. He suggests she resume playing the cello. The woman is completely taken aback. In the morning, Phil confesses that he hasn't finished his part of the presentation. Patrick tries to fix the situation, but Kiss refuses to sign a contract with the lawyers. Later, the family goes to a formal dinner, where Phil raises a toast to the family. Patrick admits that he had a relationship with one of the Kiss executives for the sake of the contract, even though he has a family, and they still have a chance. On the way home, Ev thanks her husband for his efforts to save their family, and the couple loves each other. In the morning, the wife starts searching the internet for a cello and a good tutor, when cries come from downstairs. The angry Andy has come to confront his brother who fired him, which means he won't be able to pay child support or see his daughter. At this point, Patrick calls and reminds him that everyone is already waiting for him. Andy leaves, and Ev expresses her grievances since her husband had promised to pay for both the repairs and her desires. The preoccupied Phil promises to sort everything out. 3 years ago, Phil and Ev spend a vacation in the Caribbean. They are completely happy, and the woman suggests getting married right there. Phil even tries to give her a ring, but he gets scared of something and backs out of his intention. In 2022, Phil shows Ev the cello he has repurchased for her, which she had once sold, and promises that everything will be very good for them. Afterward, he checks on his brother, whom he got a job, and they are very pleased with his performance. Andy asks him to pass a gift to his daughter, because his wife spotted him drunken and hasn't allowed them to meet. Andy's wife doesn't believe in her ex-husband's potential for change, but Phil persuades her otherwise and gives the gift to his niece. Later, he brilliantly presents and Kiss signs a contract with them, provided that they find a good lawyer who will exclusively represent them. In the evening, Patrick informs Phil that he has made arrangements with a highly reputed lawyer and asks him to attend a meeting. It turns out to be Miranda Delano, which Phil receives with visible tension. The reason is that he outplayed her in court, and the woman hasn't forgotten that. Furthermore, it's evident that Miranda has a liking for Phil, who agrees to have her join their firm. In the morning, the man meets the new secretary hired by Patrick and finds him with the representative from Kiss, who approves of Miranda's invitation. She has come to provide them with the addresses of 2 property owners who refuse to sell and thus obstruct the scheduled construction. On the way, Phil tries to convince Patrick to reconsider Miranda, but he can't understand the reasons for this. The couple manages to persuade one of the stubborn property owners, while Evelyn begins taking her first lessons, which makes it difficult for her to fulfill her duties at the firm. Meanwhile, the second property owner sends lawyers and refuses to sell. In the evening, Ev comes home later than planned because she met with a friend and again refuses to discuss the appearance of a child. Meanwhile, Patrick rents a good apartment for the secretary within walking distance of the office, persuading the young woman that she is indispensable. Later, the lawyers meet with representatives of Kiss, who point out a mistake in the documents made by Ev. Patrick informs them that Miranda is on her way to their office at the moment. Phil rushes there but doesn't manage to prevent the meeting of the 2 women. Later, Phil points out Ev's mistake, which is why they had to seek a competent lawyer, since she won't be able to work soon. The woman refuses to talk, and Phil calls Plan B to prevent the hiring of Miranda, but it turns out his credit card is empty. He buys flowers and goes to his wife, who is upset that Miranda has re-entered their lives. It turns out that Ev received a message from Phil to Miranda by mistake, where he confessed his desire to be with her. Although her husband argued that there was nothing between them, she can't stand to hear the rival's name. She gave up her career to be with him, and Phil doesn't appreciate it, bringing Miranda into their firm. But the husband reminds her that she chose him over her career, and now he is the one fighting for their relationship. In the morning, he apologizes to his wife and shows her the ring, purchased even before their trip to the Caribbean. He talks about the cancellation of the offer to Miranda, and then goes to the lawyer to inform her that she won't be able to work at their firm. His next destination is the home of the second property owner, where he discovers that their new secretary is the daughter of the stubborn man. After listening to her, he begins to lean towards the decision to sell the house. After that, Phil informs Patrick that he and Ev are going on vacation and the offer to Miranda is cancelled. He tells Evelyn the same thing, confessing that he was flattered by the attention of a famous lawyer. He asks for the child to still be a part of their plans, and Ev agrees, packing for the trip. They arrive at the same place where once upon a time, Philip was going to propose. Upon reaching the shore, he presents Ev with the ring. However, she recalls the feelings she experienced upon learning about Miranda and admits that she cheated on him. Phil throws the ring away and leaves. Returning home, Phil learns that the public is in an uproar over Kiss's intention to open the mine and accuses the lawyers of deception. Evelyn tries to talk to Phil, and he finally agrees to listen to her in exchange for the name of her lover. Ev reminds him of a client who was upset about his divorce and hit a woman on the way home. So, his lawyer, Terrence, showed interest in her. They had a brief fling, but it didn't last long. She asks her husband for forgiveness, but Phil is unforgiving, even though he was busy with Miranda at the time. The man remembers how the lawyer gave him her address, but he didn't go to her back then. Ev continues to remember how she asked for his help because she felt a lump in her chest and was very afraid of cancer. Her husband just brushed off her fears at the time, but Phil suddenly asks about the timing of her affair and concludes that the child inside her is not his, as they always used protection. At this time, Patrick ends his relationship with one of the Kiss leaders he got involved with for the contract. Phil has to search for his seemingly drunk brother and calm down their selfish mother, who reminds him of the day when Andy, his brother, stormed into her house, causing trouble. They accuse each other of mutual inattentiveness, and Phil ends up taking the blame again. Later, he conducts an interview with a candidate for the lawyer role, who proposes entirely unacceptable terms. After this, Phil fires Ev because it was her mistake that got them into this situation. A quarrel ensues, and the man admits that he shouldn't have bought the house with her. Patrick learns about this and reminds him that half the firm is his. But Phil doesn't want to hear anything and calls Plan B to prevent the purchase of the house. Soon, Patrick calls him, revealing that he had been keeping his family a secret from his lover, who saw them with the children today. This could cause problems with Kiss. On TV, reports about protests against the mine construction are broadcast, which Ev interrupts, reminding Phil of the day they didn't use protection. So, the child is definitely his. And right at that moment, the twins from Plan B ring the doorbell. Phil finds himself back on the day when they were inspecting the house, and he decided not to buy it. Later, Ev asks him to help examine her breast because she thinks there is a lump. He advises his wife to see a doctor and heads to court, where his opponent is Miranda. Phil counters all her objections and proposes to meet and discuss the terms. During the conversation, he receives a call from Andy, and Phil remembers that today, an unpleasant scene will take place at his brother's wife's house. He rushes there and prevents the scandal. He returns home late, and Evelyn, who has woken up, comforts him, sympathizing with his problems with his brother. In the morning, she initiates a conversation about the house, but Phil avoids answering because he constantly envisions Ev's infidelity. The next day, he tells his brother that Ev might be unfaithful to him, but Andy doesn't understand this perspective. Why worry about something that hasn't happened? Later, he wins the court case, and Miranda invites him to dinner, after which the two of them end up at her place. But suddenly, Phil sees Evelyn's face before him and realizes that he cannot betray the woman he loves. He goes back home, confesses his love to Ev, and in the morning, he suggests that they get back to making music, as that's what she had always wanted. He also agrees to buy the house they both liked. He easily wins all the cases that follow, amazes his wife with his foresight, and decides to quit working for Kiss. Andy returns to the family, and Phil becomes the lawyer for the man involved in the past accident with a woman. He comforts his client and offers to drive him home, as the man is deeply upset and has been drinking. They pause at the spot where the tragedy happened, and the woman calmly crosses the road. After dropping off his client at home, Phil drives to Terrence's law firm just to see him. In the evening, he buys flowers and arrives on time to conceive a child. The next day, Patrick informs that he secured a contract to represent the residents against Kiss, and Ev heads for an audition. Over time, the couple's relatives visit their new home and learn about Ev's pregnancy. They all raise a toast for the cellist's success, but Phil still can't shake off the visions of her being unfaithful to him. Evelyn starts rehearsals with the chamber orchestra, and her conductor pays close attention to her. Meanwhile, lawyers discover that Kiss is buying land around the designated mining areas. But why? Patrick learns about Kiss Company's data and starts monitoring it. One day, he follows a woman and stumbles upon a gathering of people who want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for cancer research, where he meets the woman. As for Phil, he goes to meet Ev after her rehearsal and observes her warm relationship with the conductor, Alejandro, which once again triggers jealousy in him. Moreover, she refuses to leave because she needs to rehearse a lot. Patrick, on the other hand, continues to get to know the corporation's expert in chemistry, who reveals information about the mineral extracted by Kiss. It's not the mineral itself that's dangerous, but what surrounds it, which is why the business people are buying up the neighboring lands. This means that the people living nearby will undoubtedly suffer if mineral mining begins. At the same time, Ev spends more time with the orchestra, which, of course, bothers Phil. Nevertheless, he tries to control his jealousy. One day, he attends an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to support Andy and hears him speak about his brother, who is a role model for him. Andy introduces his brother to the organizer of the meetings, and Phil brings up the issue of infidelity that never happened. Andy acknowledges that there is a problem. As for Phil, a new obsession develops. Now he envisions Ev with Alejandro. Patrick continues his relationship with the expert and gets to know her seriously ill partner, earning the woman's complete trust. Meanwhile, people from the surrounding area come to Phil, scared and refusing to sue Kiss, which makes him late for Evelyn's performance. This causes her anger and another argument. But the couple makes amends, and their relationship is restored until the moment when Ev has to leave for a tour. Phil notices that she doesn't look well, but she attributes it to tiredness. Later, Patrick announces that the expert revealed that her safety report was a fake, which means they have the corporation in their hands. He intends to threaten Kiss and demand a substantial sum from them. Phil reminds him that without the girl's testimony, the recording won't be considered evidence. With no place to go after work, and his wife not answering his calls, Phil remembers the meeting place and decides to go there to talk to the organizer. The man listens to his confessions about not trusting his wife and laments that, unfortunately, one cannot turn back time. He advises Phil to either accept the woman or let her go and move on. In the morning, he witnesses a commotion in Patrick's office. The expert has no intention of confirming her statements, which means the information gathered by the lawyer holds no weight. Then Patrick suggests intimidating Kiss, to which Phil recommends hiring their own expert and conducting analyses. Patrick takes it upon himself to go to the corporation and tells them that he knows everything and demands hush money. Meanwhile, Phil receives a call from Quebec in the middle of the night, informing him that Ev is in the hospital due to premature labor. He rushes there and learns that the situation was triggered by an infection. The woman is out of danger, but their baby girl is very weak and gets sent to a specialized clinic. At the same time, Patrick discovers a noose hanging on a swing set in his yard. Evelyn struggles with the aftermath, while Phil organizes her transfer to the same clinic where their daughter is. Patrick nearly hits a car in the parking lot. Meanwhile, the doctor informs Ev that her daughter is very weak and is unlikely to survive. The cause of this was a urinary tract infection in the mother, which triggered a kidney disease in the baby. Phil tries to ascertain the exact timing of when the illness started, but the doctor doesn't understand and refuses to answer. Later, all the relatives come to support Ev, and Patrick asks Phil to be closer to his sister. After returning home, Patrick finds a box with pictures of his family. This night, Ev confesses that she has felt unwell for a long time, but skipped the doctor's appointment due to her tour schedule. Phil asks the doctor for a prognosis, and she admits that, in all likelihood, Ev could have prevented what happened by coming in for an examination. Phil calls Plan B. 5 years ago, the couple discusses the possibility of having children, but Evelyn wants to ensure they have everything they need. Phil promises that when their children arrive, they will grow up in a big house with everything they need. In the present, Phil places an order and is informed that the agents will arrive tomorrow. In the meantime, he goes to the boxing gym, takes out a tiny girl, and promises that he will definitely save her. He makes the same promise to his wife, who is on the verge of despair. Meanwhile, Patrick receives instructions to go to a motel and check in under a false name. He complies, calls Phil, and tells him that he went to Kiss, and now he's being threatened. He asks for help, but Phil doesn't want to assist someone who acted against his advice. The next day, Phil waits for the Plan B agents, but they are nowhere to be found. Evelyn asks him to come to her, but he can't leave the house. He waits and starts cutting some information on his arm. They arrive late in the evening, and Phil finds himself at the moment when his wife was getting ready for her tour. He immediately tells Ev that she can't go because she has a fever, but she refuses to listen. Phil refers to the vision and then says that he has already experienced this. He tries to stop her, but Evelyn falls down the stairs just when her friend enters the house. Thankfully, there are no injuries to Evelyn, but the mere fact that her husband allegedly pushed her causes a real shock. The women literally rush to the orchestra's van, not giving Phil a chance to explain. Then he gets into his car and rushes after them, listening to Patrick's message about the false kiss report. He asks his partner not to threaten the corporation and promises to handle everything, but realizing that he can't stop Evelyn, he turns onto another road, calls his mother, and asks her to inform Ev that he had an accident and was taken to a clinical hospital. The woman calls Ev, and she, along with her friend, rushes to the hospital where her doctor, whom Phil tracked down, is already waiting for her. She insists on a checkup while Phil buys a lottery ticket. Evelyn meets her husband with suspicion because he looks quite well for someone who was in an accident, but Patrick becomes the center of his attention, eager to find out how he learned about the fake reports. However, Phil asks to postpone all the questions because Evelyn is in danger. Then the doctor informs them that she has detected an infection, and this is a real miracle. Had they come later, things could have gone very badly. The expectant mother must adhere to bed rest. Phil has to come up with an explanation for noticing discharge on her underwear, thereby suspecting an illness and then having a dream in which their daughter was born prematurely and died because Ev didn't undergo an examination. Ev doesn't believe him, but Phil finds excuses for all her questions. The most important thing is that they are both fine. At this moment, the lottery results are shown on TV, and Phil rolls up his sleeve, concealing the numbers cut into his skin. Later, he wins a huge jackpot, but keeps it a secret from everyone. In this storyline, he goes to kiss himself, and, threatening to carry out an independent investigation, demands that they abandon the construction of the mine in the populated area. Later, Evelyn expresses her frustration at having to stay in bed for months, but Phil reminds her of her words about not being able to cope if something happens to the baby. Evelyn is surprised. She didn't say such things. Meanwhile, the lawyer persuades people not to give in to KISS and to preserve the environment for their children and grandchildren, although Patrick is in favor of taking the corporation's money and ending the resistance because he needs the money to pay off his mortgage. But Phil remains resolute and reminds them about conscience. 2 days later, he goes to pick up Evelyn, not realizing that he is being followed. He picks up his wife, who doesn't understand what has happened to her partner, who tries to control her every move. Evelyn is surprised to see a new car, and Phil almost hits Patrick's car in the parking lot. A letter with photos of his family is found at the door. He calls a specialist to install security systems in the house, which surprises Evelyn. He has to confess that KISS is threatening him. He tells Patrick the same thing. He then offers him money to leave the firm. The partner is utterly puzzled, and Phil gives an interview where he reveals everything about the deal with the corporation and the fake reports. A commotion ensues, and now it's pointless and even dangerous to threaten Phil. Evelyn misses him more and more, so Phil brings a stack of videotapes and books to the house and hires a housekeeper and a nurse for her. She doesn't understand where the money came from, and in the meantime, Phil buys a new house and buys out Patrick's share for a very good price. One day, he catches Evelyn at home with Alejandro and her friend, with whom she's rehearsing, and again, he experiences jealousy. Unable to stand it, he takes Evelyn to the new house and admits that he won $25 million. He shows her the house, especially proud of the children's room when Evelyn's water breaks. He takes her to the hospital, where Evelyn gives birth to a healthy girl. 7 years ago, Evelyn wakes up with a hangover in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. But Evelyn has no intention of starting a relationship, and today she needs to be at a party celebrating the opening of her brother's law firm, where she meets Phil and eventually enters into a relationship. In the present, Phil joyfully takes care of the child and establishes a fund to help sick children to prevent sorrow and pain. However, his transformation into a politician leads to Evelyn's feeling of misunderstanding and even disapproval. Patrick also hopes for his return to the firm, although he acquired it entirely. And one day, Evelyn confesses that he is suffocating her with his care. He always knows what to do and makes her follow his advice. Then Phil tells her about the Plan B agency, which makes her laugh. Naturally, she doesn't believe his words and confesses that she, too, would like to move back in time, never abandon music, not live in the house, not have a child, and not be with him in the first place. Phil is shocked by her admission and suggests they go back to the past, Right now. He dials a number, but Evelyn thinks he's crazy and leaves. At home, the woman packs her things and prepares her daughter, despite all her husband's promises to change. He is ready to give her everything, as long as she doesn't leave, but it's all in vain, and Evelyn goes to her parents' house. For the first time, Phil can't decide which period in time he needs to go to in order to fix this. He spends whole days at home, staring at the ceiling when Andy comes and tries to help his brother in any way possible. This ends in a drinking binge and the realization that no amount of money and effort can change the present. He starts to get heavily involved in the foundation's work, allocating money for the construction of a children's hospital, when Patrick suddenly shows up with Evelyn because Phil demanded full custody of their daughter. He warns that no one will be able to prove that Evelyn is a bad mother, but a friend of his wife saw him push her down the stairs. Phil offers Patrick $200,000, but for the first time in his life, Patrick is in no need of money, unable to comprehend how his friend reached this point. Evelyn shows up at rehearsals and tells Alejandro that her relationship with Phil is over. However, the woman does not prevent Phil from communicating with their daughter after he has given up full custody. The man goes on outings with the little girl and takes her on weekends. Gradually, his relationship with Evelyn and Patrick improves, although Phil does not rush to sign a divorce agreement. One day, the man goes to a pool where children's classes are taking place and he participates in them, while Evelyn watches from the sidelines, understanding that Phil loves their daughter very much. The woman dedicates herself entirely to her creativity and socializing with friends, even though she disagrees that these years were wasted. However, Charlotte falls ill somehow, and the couple goes to the hospital, where a doctor, seeing how they care for the girl, calls them an excellent team. On the way back, Phil confesses his love to his wife, but she doesn't want to hear it. They manage to be parents but not a couple. After these words, Phil freezes at the wheel, and in the next moment, a collision occurs. His consciousness flickers on and off as he sees doctors, then Patrick, then doctors again, and Andy. Last of all, Evelyn comes in, wishing him to die as soon as possible. But soon Phil regains consciousness and asks Andy to take him home. Andy complies with his request, even though his brother has sustained quite severe injuries. At home, he finds the Plan B number and places an order. Andy can't understand what's happening, but his brother simply asks him to wait. In the morning, the doorbell rings, and the twins appear at the doorstep of Evelyn. They drag her into the van, and the woman wakes up with a hangover, in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. Evelyn can't understand how this was possible, and realizing she is in the past, she screams in horror. She bursts into her brother's party and throws a fit, accusing Phil of killing her daughter. Onlookers believe she has gone insane, and Phil even claims he is seeing her for the first time. Her friend believes she might have hit her head, but reminds her that it is time to fly to Prague, as she wanted. The woman packs up and starts a new life. 7 years later, she flies to Canada with Alejandro, whom she intends to marry and introduce to her parents. And at the same time, Phil meets his pregnant wife, Miranda, who had been meeting her ex-husband for business matters, which doesn't sit well with her current spouse. However, Miranda reminds him that she's here with him and has no intention of going anywhere. Besides, they're expecting a child. Phil apologizes because he's been trying hard not to control her every move. They go to a concert where Patrick and his family are also present, and he introduces Evelyn to his friend's family. Later, when they're alone, she confesses that she was very angry with him, but now she's grateful for what he did. She's happy in doing what she loves. It's at this point that Phil apologizes for both himself and Charlotte, indicating that everything that happened was not what it seemed. Many people dream of going back in time and changing something that ruined their lives, but does it always lead to a better outcome? Turid Sayer, together with her teenage sons, Magne and Lauritz, return to the Norwegian city of Edda after many years of absence. At the entrance to the city, their car gets stuck behind an old man in an electric wheelchair who is trying to turn right. Magne gets out of the car to help, and the old man's wife approaches him. Looking into the guy's eyes, she smiles with satisfaction. He's a good boy, and then she touches his forehead. Magne's iris changes color for a moment, and then the guy feels something unusual in the perception of the world. He returns to the car and, trying to close the window, breaks off the window lifter handle. Stunned, Magne turns the thing in his hands and suddenly says that it's going to rain. Mother and brother laugh. There is not a cloud in the sky, and immediately the car is showered with a heavy rain. They continue on their way and get to their grandmother's old house. Lauritz is not happy that there is a shabby-looking trailer near the house, and Magne picks up an advertisement that calls for making the air of the city cleaner. The next morning, the guys go to school. Oddly enough, the brothers are assigned to the same class. The thing is, Magne is dyslexic, which is expressed by difficulties with word recognition and insufficient abilities in reading and writing. Magne's attention is immediately drawn to a pretty blonde, Gry, but Lauritz is ahead of him, and Magne has to sit in the back of the class next to Isolde, who is not popular at school. A lesson on the Scandinavian gods begins, and Magne learns that Edda is the last Norwegian city to convert to Christianity. It was here that Ragnarok took place, during which the gods died and the fate of the giants remained unknown. During lunch, Magne sits at Isolde's desk again and learns that she's on the side of the Greens and is fighting against the pollution of the world. She also introduces the guy to Fjord Utol as son of the owner of the Utol Industries factories, Fjord's sister Saxa, and their mother, the director of the school by the name of Ran. And then she talks about her blog on YouTube. At the end of the classes, the two leave school together, and then Isolde notices that one of the wheels in her bicycle is bent. Much to the girl's astonishment, Magne easily fixes the brake and returns the wheel to its original condition, which surprises him as well. In addition, he notices that his eyesight has begun to improve. The next day, he, Isolde, and Gry get a general assignment in sociology and begin to study democracy. Magne suggests studying the topic by using their town as an example. At this moment, he sees his mother, who has come to talk to the director. The women discuss boy's progress at school and recall the tragedy that happened many years ago when the boy's father died under mysterious circumstances. Later, the mother notices that Magne is not wearing any glasses and does not understand how this can be. But she's distracted by Vidar Utol's car. It turns out that she and Vidar have known each other for a long time. After returning home, Vidar tells his wife Ran about the meeting with the woman, while their children Fjord and Saxa discuss their appearance and whether it matches their age. Vidar gives them a task to follow Magne, who is currently engaged in repairs, and notices a rune carved on his father's tools. Later, the guy visits Isolde's page and looks through her materials about the strange death of the fish in the fjord. The next day, the girl invites him to her place and reminds him that he no longer needs glasses. While choosing water in the store, she explains to Magne that he can't drink tap water in Edda, and the store clerk suddenly warns the guy about the danger of the vernal equinox. In Isolde's house, the guy finds out that the history teacher, Erich, is the girl's father. At dinner, she invites him to go with her to the mountain as she monitors the speed at which the glacier is melting. They can go down by paragliding. The girl asks her father questions about her mother's death, but he keeps silent. Magne shares his memories of his father, and sweeping the girl's diary off the table, finds out that she has been hopelessly in love with Saxa for a long time. The next day, he tells his classmates about the upcoming hike in the mountains, while Fjord invites everyone to a party at his house. Returning home, Magne finds his mother repairing the fence, and his attention is drawn to his father's sledgehammer marked with the rune. The next day, Magne and Isolde go to the mountains. Soon they reach a blocked bridge, but Magne resolutely steps over the warning sign. Suddenly, the boy gets a text that his mother is unwell. He hurries to the city and Isolde goes on alone. Meanwhile, Vidar's car is driving along the mountain road. Stopping on the side of the road, Vidar goes outside, undresses, and starts hunting deer grazing on the mountain. With one blow, he kills the animal and rips out its heart. Meanwhile, Isolde reaches the glacier and sees her marks. She takes water samples and then notices the thawed entrance to the cave and photographs it. Once inside, she finds a door blocking the entrance to the depth of the cave. Standing over the fjord, Vidar eats the raw heart of the deer and emits a heart-rending cry, which frightens Isolde. Upon reaching home, Magne discovers that his mother is absolutely fine and, angry at his brother's stupid joke, goes outside. He sees Isolde paragliding down the mountain. Suddenly, the paraglider starts drifting towards electric wires. The guy hurries to the crash site and finds the girl's lifeless body. Vidar also arrives and tries to help her and then calls for an ambulance. But nothing can be done anymore. Returning home, Magne throws away his glasses and sees the sledgehammer. The distraught guy throws the hammer and it disappears into the clouds, which are instantly covered with lightning. After everything that happened, Magne is taking the death of her friend hard and decides never to wear glasses again. The classmates ask a lot of questions about the girl's death, but he can't say anything definite. He enters the classroom and sits down at the desk whose second half is covered with flowers and burning candles. Ren makes an announcement that there will be no history class today, but suddenly Isolde's father enters the classroom. He cannot stay at home alone. The man asks the school not to cancel the vernal equinox holiday because Isolde would be against such a decision. Later, the police announce that the girl's death was caused by a thunderstorm strike to the dome of the paraglider. But Magne objects. Everything happened before his eyes, and there was no thunderstorm at that time. Nevertheless, the case is being closed. On the same day, Vidar asks Stuart to get the insurance money for his car, which was smashed by some madman. And he sends the woman photos in which Stuart recognizes the sledgehammer. She hurries home to ask Magne questions, but he himself is shocked by such an accusation. The guy calculates how far he threw the hammer, 1,537 meters. But this is impossible. Magne buys a new sledgehammer and throws it in a deserted place late at night. And then he calculates the distance, 541 meters, which is several times higher than the world's record to a hammer throwing. Meanwhile, Vidar examines the sledgehammer while Ren speaks about the experiences of the school children who sincerely mourn the dead girl. And then the husband suddenly admits that he killed Isolde because she found the entrance to the cave. The woman gets angry. They agreed not to touch the children, but since it happened, they need to find Isolde's lost phone. At school, Gry and Magne continue to work on the project together and listen to a warning not to blame the destruction of the planet only on the rich. Later at home, sorting out his mother's things, Lauritz finds an old blouse. Magne invites Gry to work at his house, which leads to a heartfelt conversation about Magne's past. Meanwhile, Turid notices Erich in the store looking lost. She expresses sympathy and the man is grateful to her for it. Lauritz finds Magne watching the weather forecast. Magne insists that there was no thunderstorm the day Isolde died, and then he admits that it was he who threw the sledgehammer into Vido's car, but his brother doesn't believe it. The celebration of the vernal equinox begins at school. The classmates show Saxa a photo of an improvised altar at the site of Isolde's death, while Vidar inspects this area in search of the girl's phone. He notices that Magne is visiting the place too. At school, everyone is shocked by the sight of Lauritz, who came to the evening in his mother's blouse and with makeup. The headmistress opens the evening and offers a moment of silence for Isolde. Saxa sings a song about her native land, which is interrupted by the appearance of Magne. Later, Lauritz advises his brother to forget about Gry because Fjord is already hitting on her. Later, Lauritz starts hitting on Yakutu. Then the headmistress takes the two boys away. Magne sits down with Gry, but Fjord invites the girl to a dance, and the guy has nothing to do but sit and watch. Watching them, he crushes the bottle in his hand and it shatters into small pieces. He goes to the men's room where he meets Oscar, whose mother is a police officer, and he blurts out that the girl died from hitting a rock. At this time, hot dancing begins in the hall, and Magne sees the headmistress surrounded by boys. Fjord puts on his music and he and Saxa begin a strange sensual dance to which Lauritz joins. The three of them squirm on the dance floor much to the delight and astonishment of the crowd. Magne goes to Isolde's father's house and informs him about the change in the cause of his daughter's death. He's sure that the police are lying, but the inconsolable father asks to not disturb the peace of his dead daughter. Out of anger, Magne easily moves the multi-ton car in front of the house, which terrifies Erich. At this time, Fjord, Lauritz and Oscar are going to the altar, and younger Utul, ridiculing people's stupid beliefs, urinates on the burning candles. Oscar manages to record this and upload everything to the internet. Fjord orders the video to be deleted, but it has already gone online. Magne is reviewing numerous notes about violations of environmental regulations by Utul Industries, which Erich shows him, and he throws away the girl's diary because she has the right to personal secrets. And at Utul's house, the owner is feeding his dog when Ren shows him a scandalous photo from the altar. The husband promises to deal with this issue. Sex is trying to find out at least something new about Magne from Gry, who stayed overnight at their house, but she does not know anything. She goes to the bathroom and witnesses Vidar beating his son. The man is furious. People worship them too and sacrifice to them. Therefore his son insulted him with his axe too. Frightened, Gry hurries to take refuge in Sax's room. The next day, Isolde's funeral takes place and everyone goes to church, but returning home, the Sayer family finds their home trashed. The brothers go to the homeless neighbor, accusing him of stealing from their house. He admits that he has been in the apartment, but only after another man who arrived there in a big black car accompanied by a dog. The brothers realize that it is Vidar but do not understand why he needed it. Later, Magne goes to see a therapist. He feels that everything has changed around him but does not find an explanation for this. He talks about the robbery and accuses the police of inaction, and the therapist tells Ren about the session. Back home, Magne tells his mother about the conversation with the neighbor and blames Vidar, but Turet says that it's absurd and does not want to hear anything about it, especially since Eric has arrived. He hands Isolde's laptop to Magne because his computer is already failing. The guy searches the computer and finds data on changes in natural conditions in the vicinity of Edda. The same evening, Ren tells her husband about the therapy session. She is furious. Not only did Vidar break into Magne's house, but the guy's neighbor saw him. And now everyone can find out about this inexplicable case. The next day, Gry confesses to Fjord that she saw the beating, and it shocked her. But he changes the topic of the conversation. The girl agrees to ride with him, but Lauritz and Saxa are also in the car. Meanwhile, Magne is talking to a police representative again. He knows for sure that there was no wind that day, but the woman objects. He said that he got to the city in half an hour and no one can do that. The young people are driving along a mountain road and Fjord puts on a song in the ancient Icelandic language, which is surprising to Gry. Suddenly, a bird breaks against the windshield of the car. Saxa and Fjord come out to look at it. The sister reminds them of the need to learn at least something about Magne and eats the bird. Puzzled by the officer's words, Magne goes to a deserted warehouse and starts jogging to see how fast he runs. He does a 100-meter dash in just 7 seconds. Meanwhile, Erich has given Isolde's jacket, which has traces of blood on it, and Vidar follows Magne and witnesses an accident in which the guy is hit by a snowplow. He joyfully announces to the family about Magne's death, who interfered with their affairs. Then Vidar confesses to the children that he killed Isolde because she found dangerous things hidden by them in the glacier. Ren reminds them of the danger they are exposed to by getting close to mortals. Meanwhile, the doctors at the hospital are perplexed. The guy who was hit by the snowplow has no injuries at all. Magne goes home, and he doesn't know that at this very moment the body of his deceased neighbor, who was a witness to the robbery of their house, was being brought to the morgue. At home, Turid thanks the gods for saving her child's life, and Magne makes another note: he is now also invulnerable. His sight and sense of smell also have improved. The next day, during the lesson, there is a skirmish when Magne blames the Utul plants for the emissions of harmful substances which caused the inhabitants of the fjord to die. Saxa resolutely defends her father. After the lesson, Magne asks the teacher to test the dried blood from Isolde's jacket. He is sure that there's someone else's blood on the clothes. At least they smell different. The woman is surprised by his sense of smell and agrees to run the test. Later, Gry asks him questions about the incident. He shows her the jacket and asks her to smell it, but the girl does not detect the difference at all. In the afternoon, a group of classmates goes to a cafe where Oscar breaks the news about Ran's behavior the previous evening, which he learned about from his friends. Saxa is outraged by the silly rumors and stirs the conversation towards Gry, who is still a virgin. This pisses Gry off, and she goes home where she finds her father in front of a can of beer. The man is upset. The insurance company refused to pay him money for his sick lungs. No one sees the connection between the disease and the emissions from the U2 factories. Meanwhile, Vidar is raging in his house. No mortal could have survived. Who is this guy? To which Ran promises to find out everything very soon, since in the evening the brothers will come to them for dinner. Magne and Lauritz go to the Utul house, unaware that they are the only guests of the evening. They are seated at a chic table and are treated to alcoholic drinks. The hosts do not skimp on the drinks. Vidar pours Magne mead, the drink of the ancient gods. Feeling intoxicated, Magne begins to behave inappropriately, and throwing an axe at the target hanging on the wall simply breaks it. And then he confides in Ren about his new strength. The woman is surprised and offers to fight with her hands. The guy promises to defeat her and holds out his hand. They begin to fight, and Magni realizes that he cannot defeat the fragile-looking woman. They fight without restraining themselves, and at some point he suddenly sees the true appearance of an ancient monster hiding behind the guise of the beauty. At this moment, the table breaks down. Jumping up from behind the wreckage, Magni sees the woman in front of him again. He goes to the bathroom and after washing his face, looks up at the mirror and suddenly sees the face of an ancient warrior staring back at him. Coming up next, a recap of the following episodes. In the future, a time comes when women are offered a unique opportunity to conceive and give birth to a child using mobile artificial wombs in the form of eggs. Don't say a Bob. Say a baby. You are completely tuned to the odd. Near future scenario. A young woman wakes up in her apartment. Her home AI immediately activates the coffee maker and informs Rachel of the good news about the improvement in her digestive health. It suggests an appropriate outfit for the day and reminds her of her visit to the capsule center. Rachel wakes up her husband, Elvie, to wish him a good morning and say goodbye before heading to work. The AI now advises Elvie on his outfit for the day and informs him that his happiness index has slightly increased. He receives a prepared breakfast and heads to the home greenhouse. Meanwhile, Rachel arrives at work, where today there is a presentation of a new generation of cognitive assistants called our machines, which are soon to become new cognitive supervisors. After the meeting, Rachel is invited by her supervisor, who is concerned about the possibility of her expanding her family, as they intend to offer her a promotion. Additionally, the corporation is willing to provide funding for the services of the uterus center, which Rachel appreciates. Following this, Rachel continues her workday when she receives a call from the uterus. There have been changes in their lists, and a spot has opened up which the center can offer her. They schedule a visit, and Rachel settles into a relaxing chair, dreaming about her future child. During this time, her husband conducts a class in the botanical garden, where he shows students a fig fruit that he managed to grow naturally. He offers the young people a taste, but they view the fruit with disgust. Finally, one brave soul tries it. Meanwhile, Rachel shares the joyful news with her colleague and friend Alice and confesses that she hasn't told her husband about her visit to the center. Because of this, she has to consult her robot psychoanalyst, to whom she admits that her husband is very distant from her, as he is fixated on the natural world, which translates into his desire to have a child conceived, carried, and born naturally. The AI seeks an answer to the question of why this child would be considered natural, while one gestated in a capsule would not. What distinguishes them? And Rachel is at a loss, unable to find the differences. Later, she and her friend go out for lunch, and while inhaling the pleasant aromas, Rachel agrees that she should talk to her husband about everything. She finds her husband watching a relaxing program, and he talks about his day. Elvie is disheartened by the fact that the younger generation doesn't know how to interact with nature because no one taught them. At some point, people decided that nature was just a commodity, and that's when everything began to fall apart. The next day, Rachel goes to the uterus center, where she and others discuss how, when the birth rate dropped to 0, their newly established center took on the task of solving the problem. Women didn't want to have children because it was inconvenient for them. The center wants them to live full lives and pursue their dreams without being distracted by children. The director of the center, Linda, welcomes the gathering and is ready to share the latest technological advancements. Humans have always managed to control nature, so why shouldn't women take control of childbirth? Linda gives a tour of the center, showing the capsule developed by scientists in which the baby grows. If parents don't have time to interact, they can always play music, audiobooks, or educational podcasts for the baby. Through an app, they can feed the child and monitor its development. One significant advantage is that children in the capsule are not exposed to viruses or toxins. The capsules operate autonomously for 48 hours. The fetus inside can hear everything happening around, so it's advisable for the mother to talk to the baby. After the discussion, Linda reminds Rachel of the need to make a deposit, but Rachel intends to talk to her husband first. Upon returning home, she confesses her intention to Elvie to have a child with the help of the uterus center, which upsets him. Not only did she make such an important decision on her own, but she also went to the center without him. Rachel apologizes, and the couple reconciles. Rachel suggests to Elvie that they talk to Alice and her husband, and the family goes to visit them. Alice enthusiastically discusses the opportunity for women to have a child without experiencing pain, suffering, or body changes. Meanwhile, her husband demonstrates a special belt for carrying the egg capsule, to which Elvie looks quite skeptical. He categorically refuses to hold the capsule. At home, he can't shake the feeling that the egg is made of plastic. Rachel assures him that the child will perceive it as a real maternal womb, but LV remains unwavering. It's hard for him to accept that the child will be packaged in plastic. The wife suggests that he visit her robot psychotherapist. Although he initially takes offense at this advice, he eventually decides to go. However, after listening to the AI's advice, the man realizes that they completely misunderstand each other. Upon returning home and discussing the evolution that led humanity to grow children in capsules, he agrees to his wife's proposal because he understands how important it is to her. The next day they go to the center, and although now a child can be made from any material, Rachel announces that LV will be the biological father. She allows nature to determine the child's gender. Linda leads them to a room where on a large screen, future parents can witness the moment of conception. Later, they are brought a container with a fertilized zygote so they can admire it. The couple later informs Rachel's parents about the upcoming event. Rachel's father suggests that LV sell his countryside house since they never go there, but the man vehemently opposes the idea. While the capsule remains at the center, the future parents continue their usual lives. The day comes when the program connects Rachel to the capsule, and even though nothing can be heard from inside yet, she starts selecting music for the baby. At one point, she tries to see the baby, but she is told that it is kept in complete darkness until 7 weeks. Then one of the capsules sends a signal. It's time for birth. Even though everything is programmed, the baby doesn't always arrive at the appointed time. Soon Rachel starts having strange dreams, which she confides to her psychoanalyst, but the AI convinces her that dreams are unreliable material for analysis. After 6 weeks of pregnancy, when the baby's heartbeat is detectable, Linda allows them to take the capsule home. For the first time, she shows them the baby. On that day, Rachel prepares the kids' room, and LV brings an olive tree sapling. However, his wife suggests replacing it with a hologram, and the offended husband takes the tree away, promising to plant it in their countryside house, which Rachel once again suggests selling. She just doesn't understand why they should go somewhere when they have everything for a good life here, but LV refuses to raise the child among plastic. The next day, Rachel meets a pregnant woman in the pool who allows her to listen to her baby's movements, filling her with delight. In the evening, she moves the capsule to their bedroom because they want to spend as much time as possible with the future child. However, LV feels uncomfortable with intimacy while the baby is present, so they move the capsule to baby's room. It immediately signals hunger, and the parents rush to feed their offspring. Sometime later, they go on a tour to the center to prepare for parenting. Linda shows prospective parents the play areas where children play and answers their questions. The government no longer funds education, but the center teaches programming and logic to the little ones. In one of the rooms, children engage in creative activities, or rather, a computer does the work, and the children provide feedback. One of the parents asked about the dreams the children have, but Linda reassures him. Dreams are excluded from the fetal development program because they do not carry any useful information. One day, LV is in his greenhouse when he hears the capsule's signal. He feeds the baby, but then decides to communicate with it, while Rachel receives a warning about her declining productivity. Her husband is trying on the capsule holder and takes pride in his success. Now he carries the capsule with him, reading books to the baby, posing riddles, showing his plants, and falling asleep beside it. At work, he suggests to the visitors to hug a tree and experience its calming effect on the human mind. His supervisor congratulates him on the upcoming joyful event and suggests replacing the live plants in the greenhouse with holographic images, as growing real trees is too expensive, but LV becomes furious and rejects the proposal. At home, the family watches a movie about penguins, and the man starts crying when he learns about the dedication of the birds. Worried, Rachel suggests returning the capsule to the center, as other parents do. That's when LV reveals that he brought the capsule to work. Rachel shares this with her colleagues. She is concerned about her husband's close interaction with the egg. However, the women encourage her to be happy about it. After all, the father is immediately bonding with the future child. Rachel continues to have strange dreams, and her pregnant friend reassures her that it's normal for expectant mothers. One day, Rachel dreams of herself with a baby bump, and she enjoys it. The woman also begins to devote all her attention to the capsule, especially after LV's mother sent them an old book about the benefits of parental closeness. But this starts to worry Rachel, and the couple goes to a psychoanalyst. Finding a balance is challenging because everything revolves around the child. Rachel is jealous of LV because he spends more time with the baby than she does. After all, she is the mother and should feel the baby. After listening to their argument, the AI asks for permission to connect to the capsule because it cannot take sides. The next day, Rachel takes the capsule to work. However, she behaves distractedly, giving the baby too much attention. Alice suggests placing the egg in a specially designated area where other future mothers' capsules are stored because Rachel is becoming a distracting mother. Alice's capsule is kept at the center because it's more convenient for her. In the evening, Rachel, taking the capsule, hurries to the center for a parenting seminar, after which Linda suggests leaving the baby in the incubation area. The family reluctantly complies with the demand. The house becomes empty, and both the husband and wife miss their capsule. One day, Rachel dreams of a seaside where she walks with the baby in her arms. She wakes up in tears and moves Elvie's little tree to the kids' room, surprising her husband. Meanwhile, at work, her boss is not entirely satisfied with her productivity, but Rachel assures her that everything is fine. Later, Linda informs them that the delivery day will be next Wednesday, as deliveries now occur on the 39th week. They can't afford babies being born earlier or later, as the capsules are in high demand. Parents must receive oxytocin, the love hormone, to prepare for the baby's arrival. However, the family shocks the director with a request to allow them to take the capsule home before delivery, even though it goes against the rules. Moreover, important personality development seminars are held every day. Linda suggests they take special tablets to regulate the baby's sleep, which greatly helps parents. The couple leaves, passing through protesting women against the capsules. Suddenly, Elvie returns and, taking advantage of the midwife being occupied with another patient, retrieves his capsule without permission. That night, Rachel dreams that she is buying her baby at a store, and they offer her a deal, 2 for the price of 1. Upon waking up, she wakes her husband and asks him to take her to their countryside home to give birth in nature. Elvie rushes to the center and informs Linda that they intend to give birth at home. However, the director is strongly against it. The capsule is very expensive and they cannot take risks, so they must return the egg as soon as possible. Nevertheless, the family leaves for their coastal home. Rachel enjoys the surrounding nature, starting to understand her husband. They walk in the forest together and plant an olive tree. They often sit by the sea with the capsule until one night it turns off. In a panic, Rachel suggests calling the center, but her husband reminds her that they still have 48 hours and they must trust the child. They are awakened by the onset of labor, requiring a code to be entered, but they can't figure it out. So Elvie grabs a hammer. He opens the capsule and retrieves a beautiful, healthy baby. The happy parents embrace him. Early in the morning, Rachel puts the capsule in a box, takes it to the post office, and sends it back to the center. She then returns home where her husband and son are sleeping on the bed. The creators of the film portrayed the absurdity of a possible social evolution quite delicately. Nothing terrible happened. People just became so lazy that they forgot about the joys of life. Why go out of town when you can visit a capsule garden where you lie down and inhale the scents of the forest? And why go through the process of pregnancy and subject your body to stress? After all, there's the capsule.